My brother Marcus's smirk cut deeper than any knife as he leaned back in his chair. "You have 1 week to leave Dusty." The words hung in our parents' dining room like poison. Mom clutched her wine glass. Dad stared at his plate. 28 years in this house, and my own family was evicting me. I reached into my purse, pulled out the manila envelope I'd been carrying for 3 days, and slid the property deed across the mahogany table. "Actually, you all have 24 hours. The silence that followed felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. My hands trembled slightly as I watched their faces transform from smugness to confusion. Marcus, 32 and still living at home despite his six-figure salary as a financial analyst, had always been the favorite child. His designer suit probably cost more than my monthly rent, and the Rolex on his wrist caught the chandelier light as he reached for the papers. While I worked 3 jobs to put myself through nursing school, he got a free ride to an Ivy League college. I remembered those nights serving coffee at the diner until 3 in the morning, then rushing to my 7 o'clock anatomy class, running on 2 hours of sleep and pure determination. Meanwhile, Marcus spent his college years joining fraternity parties and spring breaks in Cancun, all funded by our parents' seemingly endless generosity. While I paid $800 monthly for my cramped studio apartment above the bakery on 10th Street, he lived here, rent-free in his childhood bedroom, now transformed into what looked like a bachelor pad from a magazine. He'd been saving his money for luxury cars and expensive watches, while I counted pennies to afford textbooks and scrubs for my clinical rotations. The previous week had changed everything. I'd come by to return Mom's casserole dish when I heard Marcus on a conference call in Dad's study. The door was slightly ajar, and his voice carried clearly into the hallway. "The property transfer should be straightforward once she's out," he was saying. "My parents have already agreed to sign everything over to me. We just need to handle the current occupancy issue." My blood had run cold. Current occupancy issue, is that what I become to them? My suspicions led me straight to the county records office downtown. The building smelled like old paper and floor polish, and the elderly clerk behind the counter, Mrs. Patterson, had worked there for 43 years. Her wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose as she helped me navigate through decades of property records. "Oh, honey," she'd said softly when we found what I was looking for. "Sometimes family can surprise you in the worst ways." 5 years ago, our grandmother Rose had secretly transferred the house deed to me before her death, bypassing my parents entirely. The document was clear, notarized, and completely legal. The house at 47 Maple Street had been mine since the day after my 23rd birthday, though no one had bothered to tell me. Grandma Rose had seen what I'd refused to acknowledge for so long. She'd watched how my parents favored Marcus, how they dismissed my achievements while celebrating his every minor accomplishment. When I made the dean's list 4 semesters in a row, they barely glanced at the certificate. But when Marcus got a participation trophy in his company's golf tournament, it went on the mantle like an Olympic medal. The twist that made my stomach turn wasn't just the secret transfer. It was discovering that Marcus had convinced our parents to officially evict me to make room for his pregnant girlfriend, Stephanie. He'd been painting me as an unstable burden, a spinster daughter at 28, who needed tough love to finally grow up and move on with her life. "She's never going to leave on her own," I'd overheard him telling Mom last month. "Sometimes you have to force people to spread their wings." Spread my wings, I'd been flying against hurricane winds my entire adult life, while he'd been coasting on thermal updrafts provided by our parents' favoritism. The irony wasn't lost on me that he was 32 living at home while calling me the failure for having my own apartment and career. Now, as I watched him read through the deed transfer, his face went through a series of expressions like a slideshow presentation. Confusion melted into disbelief, which transformed into something uglier. Rage mixed with panic. "This has to be fake," he stammered, his usual eloquence abandoning him. "Grandma she didn't even like you that much." But that was where he was wrong. Grandma Rose had loved me in the way that mattered. She'd seen me for who I was, not who my parents wanted me to be. She'd been the one person at my high school graduation cheering louder than everyone else, the one who'd slipped me grocery money during my hardest months in college, the one who told me that sometimes the black sheep of the family was the only one worth saving. Mom finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "This isn't possible. The house belongs to us. We've been paying the mortgage for 30 years. I pulled out the next document from my envelope. The mortgage satisfaction letter dated 15 years ago. Grandma Rose paid it off completely before she transferred it to me. You've been living here rent-free in my house for 5 years. Dad's face had turned an alarming shade of purple, the vein in his forehead that appeared during his worst tempers now throbbing visibly. Richard Brennan was a man who controlled everything in his domain, from his construction business to his family. The idea that something this significant had happened without his knowledge or permission was causing him to short-circuit like a overloaded fuse box. "You conniving little—" he started, but I held up my hand. "Choose your next words very carefully, Dad. Everything from this moment forward can and will be used in court." The dining room felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls were closing in on all of us. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly in the silence, counting down seconds to a family explosion that had been building for 28 years. Through the window, I could see our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, pretending to water her already drenched roses, clearly sensing the drama unfolding inside. Marcus pushed back his chair, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor Grandma Rose had installed the year before she died. "You can't kick us out. This is our home. Where would Mom and Dad go? They're in their 60s. Where was I supposed to go?" I countered, my voice steady despite the earthquake of emotions inside me. "When you all decided I needed to leave in a week, did any of you wonder where I'd end up, or was that not your problem?" The truth hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for decades, finally given enough oxygen to burst into flames. They hadn't wondered because they hadn't cared. I was the inconvenient daughter who refused to follow the script they'd written for me. Marry young, produce grandchildren, and quietly fade into the background of Marcus's spotlight. But Grandma Rose had rewritten that script, and now it was time for the final act. 3 hours before this dinner, I'd been sitting in the law office of Harold Fitzgerald, the estate attorney who'd handled Grandma Rose's affairs. His office occupied the 3rd floor of a historic building downtown, with dark wood paneling and leather-bound books that spoke of decades of family secrets kept and revealed. Harold was in his 70s with silver hair and kind eyes behind thick glasses. He'd known Grandma Rose for 50 years and had been her confidant in more than just legal matters. When I'd called him after discovering the deed transfer, he'd immediately cleared his afternoon schedule. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," he'd said, pulling out a thick file labeled with my name. "She came to me 5 years ago with very specific instructions. She knew this day would come." What he revealed next made the house transfer look like a minor footnote. Not only did I own the house, but there was also a substantial trust fund in my name that my parents had been illegally accessing for years. Harold spread bank statements across his mahogany desk, each one showing forged signatures and unauthorized withdrawals. "They've been stealing from you since you turned 18, he explained, his professional composure barely masking his disgust. "Your grandmother set up this trust when you were born specifically for your education and future. It should have contained over $400,000 by now." The account statements painted a clear picture of systematic theft. $20,000 here for Marcus's car, $30,000 there for Mom's kitchen renovation, $50,000 for Dad's failed boat dealership venture. They'd been funding their lifestyle and Marcus's privileges with money meant for my future. "Can we prove the signatures are forged?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My signature was distinctive with a particular flourish on the D in Dusty that I developed in high school. The forgeries were close but not perfect. Someone practicing but never quite capturing the authentic flow. Harold smiled grimly. Your grandmother was thorough. She hired a handwriting expert 3 years ago to analyze suspicious documents. We have a full report confirming forgery on 47 separate withdrawals. My phone had buzzed then with a text from Mom. Family dinner tonight at 6. Don't be late. We need to discuss your future. The fake sweetness in her message was so unlike her usual curt texts that I knew immediately it was a trap. Janet Brennan didn't do family dinners without an agenda, and she certainly didn't care about discussing my future unless it somehow benefited Marcus. They're planning something, I told Harold. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled thoughtfully. Then perhaps it's time to spring your own surprise. Do you have copies of everything? I'd patted my purse where the manila envelope rested. Copies here, originals in my bank's safety deposit box, and digital scans in 3 different cloud storage accounts. Good girl. Your grandmother taught you well. The drive to my parents' house had felt surreal. Every street corner held memories. The park where Marcus had pushed me off the swings and told Mom I'd jumped the corner store where I'd bought candy with quarters I'd saved while he got $20 bills for asking the bus stop where I'd waited every morning for school while he got driven in Dad's Mercedes. When I'd pulled up to the colonial-style house on Maple Street, I'd noticed things I'd overlooked for years. The garden Grandma Rose had lovingly tended was now overgrown with weeds. The paint on the shutters she'd chosen was peeling. They'd been living in her house, my house, and letting it deteriorate while spending my money on themselves. I'd sat in my car for 5 minutes, gathering courage and reviewing my plan. The security cameras I'd installed 6 months ago would be recording everything. The voice recorder app on my phone was ready. All the documentation was organized in order of devastating revelation. I was walking into a lion's den, but this time I had claws of my own. The front door was unlocked, which was unusual. Mom always kept it locked even when expecting company. As I'd stepped inside, the smell of pot roast filled the air. My favorite meal as a child, clearly chosen to manipulate some nostalgic emotional response. Dusty's here, Marcus had called out from the living room, his voice carrying that particular note of false cheer that meant he was up to something. I'd found them arranged like a tableau in the living room. Marcus on the couch with a woman I assumed was Stephanie, my parents in their matching recliners, and an empty chair positioned in the center like a witness stand. The staging was so obvious, it was almost insulting. Stephanie was pretty in that carefully maintained way with highlighted blonde hair and a designer maternity dress that probably cost more than I made in a week. Her baby bump was prominent, and she kept rubbing it in a performative way while shooting me calculating glances. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 23, with the confident air of someone who'd never been told no. Dusty, this is Stephanie, Marcus had said, standing to put his arm around her possessively. My fiancé and the mother of your future nephew. The emphasis on your future nephew was clearly meant to guilt me, as if I should sacrifice my own life for a child who wasn't even born yet. I'd smiled politely and shaken her manicured hand, noting the massive engagement ring that had definitely been purchased with money he'd saved by living rent-free. Nice to meet you, I'd said, then noticed something that made my blood run cold. Legal documents were sitting on the coffee table, partially hidden under a magazine, but visible enough that I could see the letterhead of Brennan and Associates, Dad's lawyer friend who'd helped him with various shady dealings over the years. The words, "Notice to vacate," were clearly visible at the top of one page. They'd already prepared eviction papers. This dinner wasn't a discussion, it was meant to be an execution. Why don't we eat first? Mom had suggested, her smile not reaching her eyes. I made your favorite. As we'd moved to the dining room, I'd caught sight of something else that confirmed my suspicions. In the corner of the living room sat boxes labeled Dusty's room in Stephanie's handwriting. They weren't planning to give me a week to leave. They were planning to start packing my belongings tonight. But the most telling detail was what I'd overheard as I'd pretended to use the bathroom before dinner. Stephanie's voice had carried through the thin walls. "Are you sure she won't make a scene? I don't want stress around the baby." "Don't worry," Marcus had replied. "Dusty never fights back. She'll probably cry a little, but she'll leave quietly like she always does. That's what she's good at, disappearing when things get tough." He'd laughed then, and the sound had strengthened my resolve like steel being forged in fire. He thought he knew me based on the child I'd been, the girl who'd learned to make herself small to avoid their cruelty. But he didn't know the woman I'd become in spite of them, or perhaps because of them. As we'd sat down to dinner, I'd placed my purse carefully beside my chair, the manila envelope inside it, feeling like a loaded weapon waiting to be drawn. They thought they were springing a trap, but they had no idea they were about to step into one of their own making. Mom had served the pot roast with exaggerated care as if this last meal together was some kind of sacred ritual. Dad had poured wine for everyone except me, sparkling grape juice for me like I was still a child who couldn't be trusted with alcohol. The small slight was so typical, it almost made me laugh. "So," Mom had begun, her voice dripping with false concern, "we've all been worried about you, Dusty. 28 and still living in that tiny apartment, working those long hours at the hospital. Don't you think it's time to make some changes?" The irony of being lectured about my living situation by people who'd enabled their 32-year-old son to live at home was rich enough to choke on. But I'd played along, cutting my pot roast into precise pieces while waiting for the right moment. "Beach changes?" I'd asked innocently. "What kind of changes did you have in mind?" That's when Marcus had delivered his rehearsed line about having a week to leave, and the rest, as they say, was about to become history. The documents in my purse weren't just papers. They were 5 years of Grandma Rose's careful planning, decades of my parents' crimes cataloged and verified, and proof that the family who'd tried to destroy me had actually given me everything I needed to finally fight back. The pot roast turned to ash in my mouth as I prepared to flip the script they'd written. They wanted me gone. They were about to learn what it really meant to lose everything. As forks clattered onto plates with a symphony of shock, I carefully spread the complete documentation across the mahogany table, organizing them in order of ascending devastation. Birth certificates, death certificates, property transfers, bank statements, and page after page of forged signatures created a paper trail of betrayal that spanned years. Marcus's face underwent a transformation I'd never seen before. The golden boy who'd always had every situation under control was watching his carefully constructed world crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. His complexion went from sun-kissed tan to ghostly pale as he read through the documents, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the papers. "These have to be fake," he muttered, but even he didn't sound convinced. "You must have. How did I... What Marcus discovered the truth. Fight back. Refuse to disappear quietly like you predicted I would 10 minutes ago. I kept my voice calm and steady, each word measured and deliberate. Yes, I heard you through the bathroom wall. These houses were built in the 50s. The walls are thin." Stephanie's carefully maintained composure began to crack as she absorbed the implications. Her hand moved protectively to her belly while tears formed in her perfectly made-up eyes. The princess who thought she was inheriting a castle was realizing she'd been dating a court jester. "Marcus, what is she talking about?" Stephanie's voice pitched higher with each word. "You said you owned this house. You showed me the plans for the nursery, the renovations we were going to do." "Shut up!" Marcus snapped at her, the first crack in his Prince Charming facade. "Let me think." But I wasn't giving him time to regroup. I pulled out the bank statements next, fanning them across the table like a dealer showing a winning hand. Each withdrawal was highlighted in yellow with corresponding dates showing what the money was used for. January 15th, 2018. $20,000 withdrawn from my education trust. Coincidentally, the same day Marcus bought his BMW. March 3rd, 2019, $30,000. The exact cost of Mom's kitchen renovation. Should I continue? There are 47 more transactions here. Mom tried to snatch the papers, her perfectly manicured nails scraping across the table as I pulled them back. You ungrateful brat, after everything we've done for you. Done for me. The laugh that escaped me was bitter enough to curdle milk. Let's talk about what you've done for me, Mom. Should we start with telling my guidance counselor I wasn't college material when I had a 4.0 GPA? Or maybe when you convinced my prom date to take another girl because you didn't think I deserved to go? That was for your own good, she hissed. You needed to learn your place. My place. I stood up slowly, using my height advantage for once. My place was apparently funding your lifestyle while being told I was worthless. My place was working 3 jobs while you spent my college fund on Marcus's toys. My place was being the family ATM while being treated like an unwanted guest. Dad's face had turned an alarming shade of purple, the vein in his forehead pulsing like a warning light. Richard Brennan wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by the daughter he had always considered weak. His construction worker hands clenched into fists on the table. You're twisting everything, he growled. That money was family money. We used it for the family. Family. I pulled out the next set of documents. Let's talk about family dad, like how you took out 3 loans against this house, my house, forging my signature each time. Or how you've been claiming me as a dependent on your taxes for the past 5 years while telling everyone I'm a failure who can't support herself. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the grandfather clock seemed to hold its breath. Through the dining room window, I could see Mrs. Chen had given up pretending to garden and was openly staring through her kitchen window. By tomorrow, the entire neighborhood would know about the Brennan family implosion. But the revelations were far from over. I reached for the private investigator's report, the one Grandma Rose had commissioned 3 years before her death. She'd known something was wrong, had seen the patterns I'd been too close to recognize. Grandma Rose hired a private investigator. I announced, watching their faces blanch further. She documented everything, every lie, every theft, every scheme. She knew you were planning to steal my inheritance, so she made sure I'd get it anyway. That meddling old witch, Mom spat, her composure completely shattered. She always favored you, always sticking her nose where it didn't belong. She saved me, I corrected. While you were busy destroying me, she was building a safety net. She saw what you really were long before I did. Marcus suddenly stood his chair, scraping against the floor. This is insane. You can't kick us out. Mom and Dad are too old to start over. Think about what you're doing. I am thinking, I replied. I'm thinking about every Christmas where my presents were items you didn't want anymore, while Marcus got everything on his list. I'm thinking about being told I couldn't afford college while watching you buy him a new laptop every year. I'm thinking about 28 years of being told I wasn't good enough while funding the life of the son who was. Stephanie stood to, wobbling slightly in her designer heels. This is insane. Marcus, we should go. This is too stressful for the baby. Sit down, Marcus commanded, and the harsh tone made her flinch. We're not going anywhere. This is our house. Actually, I said, pulling out the formal eviction notice Harold had prepared, it's my house, and you have 24 hours to vacate the premises. All of you. That's when Dad made his biggest mistake. He lunged across the table, trying to grab all the documents at once. His wine glass toppled, spreading Merlot across the white tablecloth like blood across snow. In his desperation, he knocked over Mom's plate, sending pot roast and mashed potatoes flying. I'll burn it all before I let you have it. He snarled, his mask of civility completely gone. You think you're so smart, you have no idea who you're dealing with. But I did know. I'd been dealing with them my entire life. The difference was now I had proof of who they really were. Every threat you make is being recorded, I informed them calmly. The security system I installed captures audio and video. You just threatened arson on camera. Mom's gasp was theatrical enough for a soap opera. You've been spying on us in our own home. My home, I corrected again. And yes, I've been protecting my property from tenants who have proven themselves to be criminals. The word criminals hung in the air like a noose. It was one thing to be exposed as liars and thieves within the family. It was another to realize that exposure might extend beyond these walls. Marcus sank back into his chair, his bravado evaporating. Dusty, please. Let's talk about this rationally. There has to be a solution that works for everyone. There is, I agreed. You leave my house within 24 hours, you never contact me again, and you pray the district attorney is feeling lenient when I file charges. Me charges? Stephanie's voice was barely a whisper now. What charges? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Fraud, identity theft, forgery, tax evasion. Elder abuse? Yes, taking advantage of Grandma Rose's age to try to steal her assets counts. Should I continue? The list of crimes was extensive, each one documented and verified. As I laid them out methodically, I watched my family, if I could even call them that anymore, realize that their house of cards hadn't just fallen. It had been deliberately demolished brick by the daughter they'd underestimated. But the biggest revelation was yet to come. I reached for the sealed envelope at the bottom of my pile, the one marked "to be opened only when Dusty claims her inheritance." Grandma Rose's handwriting was shaky but determined, each letter formed with purpose. Before we go any further, I said, holding up the envelope, Grandma Rose left one more surprise, a letter she instructed me to read when this moment came. Mom's face went from red to white so fast I worried she might faint. No, she whispered, she wouldn't. She promised she wouldn't tell. Tell what I wondered as I broke the seal. What secret was so terrible that even my mother, who had shown no shame about theft and fraud, was terrified of its revelation? As I unfolded the letter, Grandma Rose's voice seemed to fill the room, speaking from beyond the grave to deliver one final truth that would shatter the Brennan family facade forever. The paper trembled in my hands as I began to read aloud, and with each word I understood why Mom had gone so pale. Grandma Rose hadn't just documented their crimes. She'd exposed their deepest secret. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the aged paper, Grandma Rose's lavender scent, still faintly clinging to it after all these years. The dining room fell silent, except for the thundering of my own heartbeat. Even the ever-present ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to pause in anticipation. My dearest Dusty, I began reading aloud, my voice steady despite the earthquake of emotions inside me. If you're reading this, then you've finally discovered the truth about the house, the money, and the family that never deserved you. But there's one more truth you need to know, one that explains everything about how you've been treated. Mom made a strangled sound, reaching across the table as if she could somehow stop the words from being spoken. Please, Dusty, not like this. Let me explain first. But I'd given them 28 years to explain. The time for their version of the truth had passed. I continued reading. I hired a private investigator, not just to document their financial crimes, but because I needed to understand why Janet and Richard treated you so differently from Marcus. What he uncovered shocked even me, though perhaps I should have suspected it years ago. The letter paper crinkled in my grip as I forced myself to continue. Each word was another nail in the coffin of the family mythology I'd grown up believing. When your mother was in college, she had an affair with her constitutional law professor, Dr. Thomas Hartwell. When she discovered she was pregnant, she panicked. Thomas was married ambitious and had made it clear their relationship was just a temporary arrangement. So Janet did what she's always done. She schemed. Dad's fist slammed onto the table, making everyone jump. That's enough. You don't need to hear these lies. But his reaction told me everything. These weren't lies. This was the truth he'd been running from for almost 3 decades. I kept reading. Richard Brennan was a convenient target. He was infatuated with your mother, came from a family with some money, and was gullible enough to believe her sudden interest in him was genuine. She seduced him, married him quickly, and when you were born, 2 months premature, he never questioned it. After all, you had brown eyes like both of them, and babies can come early. Stephanie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus sat frozen, his world tilting on its axis as he realized his perfect family narrative was built on quicksand. But I questioned it. The letter continued. You looked nothing like Richard as you grew. Your mannerisms, your intelligence, even the way you held a pencil. It all reminded me of someone else. So 3 years ago, when you were at work, I collected hair samples. The DNA test confirmed what I suspected. Richard Brennan is not your biological father. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. I looked up from the letter to see Dad. No Richard, with tears streaming down his face. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. I raised you, he roared. Fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head, and this is how you repay me. You stole from me. I countered, my voice eerily calm. You emotionally abused me. You treated me like an unwanted burden while spending my inheritance on your real son. So no, Richard, you didn't raise me. You tolerated me. Mom had crumpled in her chair, her carefully styled hair falling across her face as she sobbed. But even now, her tears seemed more for herself than for what she'd done to me. The letter had more to reveal. Thomas Hartwell is now State Senator Hartwell. He never knew about you, Dusty. Your mother made sure of that, threatening to destroy his career if he didn't pay her to stay quiet. Those payments stopped when you turned 5, when she married Richard and didn't need them anymore. Blackmail, I said, looking at my mother. You blackmailed my biological father and then cut me off from him completely. Did it ever occur to you that maybe he would have wanted to know me? He didn't want us, Mom shrieked. He made that clear. I did what I had to do to survive. No, I said firmly. You did what you had to do to maintain your lifestyle. There's a difference. But Grandma Rose's letter wasn't finished with its revelations. I've included contact information for Thomas Hartwell. He has a right to know you exist, and you have a right to know where you really came from. I've also discovered something else. Thomas has been searching for you. He suspected Janet might have had his child, but she covered her tracks well. He hired investigators who were blocked at every turn by the wall of lies your mother built. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. So my sister isn't even my sister. Half-sister, I corrected, though you've never treated me like any kind of sister, so I'm not sure why it matters now. The final part of Grandma Rose's letter was the most emotional. My dear girl, I want you to know that biology doesn't determine worth. You were always precious to me, not because of who your father was, but because of who you are. I watched you grow up kind despite cruelty, strong despite attempts to break you, and brilliant despite being told you were stupid. That's why I left you everything, not to punish them, but to protect and empower you. The house, the money, the investments I never told them about. It's all yours. Use it to build the life they tried to deny you. And remember, the best revenge against those who tried to dim your light is to shine even brighter. One last thing. Check the loose floorboard in your old closet. I left something there that will help you understand just how long I've been planning this. All my love, Grandma Rose. As I folded the letter, the room erupted into chaos. Mom lunged at me, trying to grab the paper, screaming about privacy and family secrets. Richard held her back, but his own face was twisted with fury. Marcus sat in stunned silence, while Stephanie openly sobbed, realizing she was carrying the grandchild of criminals and liars. You've destroyed this family, Mom wailed. No, I said, standing and gathering my documents. You destroyed this family the day you decided I was worth less than Marcus because of who my father was. You destroyed it every time you stole from me, every time you told me I wasn't good enough, every time you made me feel like an intruder in what was actually my own home. I pulled out my phone, checking the time. You now have 23 hours and 47 minutes to vacate my property. I suggest you start packing. As I turned to leave, Marcus finally spoke. Dusty, wait. This changes everything. We need to talk about this as a family. I paused at the doorway, looking back at the wreckage of what had once been my entire world. Family. You just found out we're only half siblings, and your first concern is losing your free housing. That tells me everything I need to know about what family means to you. What about my baby? Stephanie whimpered. Where are we supposed to go? That's not my problem, I said, echoing the same words they would have had for me if their plan had succeeded. Maybe Marcus can use some of that money he's been saving by living here rent-free. Oh, wait, that's right. He spent it all on toys and showing off. Richard stood up his construction worker frame, trying to be intimidating one last time. You're making a mistake, girl. You can't handle this house alone. You'll come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away. The only thing I've thrown away is 28 years of accepting abuse disguised as family. And Richard, I'm not your girl. I never was. I left them there in their shock and misery, but I wasn't done. I had one more stop to make before the night was over. Racing up to my old room, now Marcus's storage space for his exercise equipment, I went straight to the closet. Sure enough, the third floorboard from the left was loose. Underneath, wrapped in plastic, was a safety deposit box key and another note. Dusty, this key opens box 472 at First National Bank on Main Street. Inside, you'll find everything you need to claim your full inheritance, plus some surprises that will help you understand just how much you were loved, even when it didn't feel like it. Don't wait too long to claim it. Justice delayed is justice denied. GR. As I pocketed the key, I heard the commotion downstairs escalating. Mom was screaming about calling a lawyer. Richard was threatening to contest everything. Marcus was on the phone, probably trying to find a legal loophole. But I wasn't worried. Grandma Rose had been thorough, and Harold Fitzgerald was the best estate attorney in the state. They could rage against the dying of their delusional light all they wanted. Tomorrow, I would go to the bank and discover what else Grandma Rose had left me. Tomorrow, I would contact Thomas Hartwell and potentially gain the father I'd never known I'd lost. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of legally evicting the squatters who'd pretended to be my family. But tonight I would go back to my tiny apartment above the bakery, pour myself a glass of wine, and toast the grandmother who had loved me enough to play the long game. She'd known that sometimes you have to let people think they've won before you reveal you've been holding all the cards. The security system would record whatever happened after I left. If they destroyed property in their rage, it would only strengthen my case. If they tried to change the locks, they'd find I'd already had them rekeyed that morning. One of the benefits of actually owning the house. As I drove away from 47 Maple Street, I didn't look back. You can't drive forward while staring in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in my life, I had a future worth racing toward. The girl who'd entered that house 3 hours ago believing she was about to be evicted was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that sometimes the family you're born into is just the starting point, not the destination. And sometimes the best chapter of your life begins the moment you stop reading from someone else's script. As I sat in my car at the end of Maple Street, catching my breath and processing the earthquake that had just shaken my entire existence, I watched the house through my rearview mirror. The porch light flickered on and off, probably Richard in one of his rages slamming around the house. I was about to drive away when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Brennan, this is Detective Coleman. We're 5 minutes out. Are you safe? Right. In all the emotional chaos, I'd almost forgotten about the 8:30 appointment I'd arranged. Harold Fitzgerald had insisted we involve law enforcement immediately given the scale of the financial crimes. I texted back quickly, "Yes, I'm in my car at the corner of Maple and 3rd. Stay there. We'll need you to let us in since you're the legal property owner." Through my mirror, I watched a familiar figure storm out of the house. Marcus, his perfect hair now disheveled, gesturing wildly as he talked on his phone. He paced the driveway like a caged animal, and even from a distance I could see the panic in his movements. The golden boy was tarnished, and he didn't know how to handle it. 4 minutes later, blue and red lights painted the quiet suburban street in alternating flashes of color. 2 patrol cars and an unmarked sedan pulled up to the house, their arrival turning our family drama into a public spectacle. Curtains twitched in windows all along Maple Street as neighbors abandoned any pretense of not watching. I met Detective Sarah Coleman on the sidewalk. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes and an air of competent authority that immediately put me at ease. Her partner, Detective James Mitchell, looked like he'd seen enough family fraud cases to write a book about them. "Ms. Brennan, thank you for your cooperation," Detective Coleman said, shaking my hand firmly. "Mr. Fitzgerald briefed us on the situation. We have warrants for financial records and arrest if necessary. Are all parties currently inside the residence?" "Yes, except for my brother Marcus. He's in the driveway." I pointed to where Marcus had frozen mid-pace and his phone still pressed to his ear as he stared at the police cars in horror. Detective Coleman nodded to 2 uniformed officers. "Paulson Rodriguez, keep an eye on him. Don't let him leave, but don't engage unless necessary." She turned back to me. "We'll need you to formally grant us permission to enter your property." "You have my full permission," I said clearly, making sure the body camera on her vest captured my consent. "All 4 individuals currently on the property are there without my authorization, as I've served them with a 24-hour eviction notice." As we approached the house, Marcus tried to intercept us. "Officers, there's been a misunderstanding. This is a family matter that's gotten out of hand. My sister is having some sort of breakdown." "Step aside, sir," Officer Paulson said firmly. "We'll need to speak with everyone separately." Marcus's face went from desperate charm to ugly anger in seconds. "Do you know who I am? I work for Harriman Financial. I'll have your badges for this harassment." "Sir, you need to calm down," Officer Rodriguez warned, her hand moving to her radio. "Step back from the detective." I used my key to open the front door. Thankfully, they hadn't had time to try changing the locks. The scene inside was chaos. The dining room looked like a tornado had hit it, with papers scattered everywhere and food splattered on the walls. Mom was on her hands and knees, desperately trying to gather documents, while mascara ran down her cheeks in black rivers. "What are you doing in my house?" Richard bellowed, emerging from the kitchen with a baseball bat in his hands. "Get out before I—" "Ah, sir, put the bat down immediately." Detective Mitchell commanded, his hand moving to his weapon. "This is the police. Put it down now." Richard's bravado crumbled as he realized the gravity of the situation. The bat clattered to the floor as he raised his hands. "This is a mistake. That girl is lying to you. She's always been troubled." Richard Brennan. Detective Coleman consulted her notebook. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, identity theft, and forgery. You have the right to remain silent." As she read him his rights, Mom scrambled to her feet, clutching papers to her chest. "You can't arrest him. He's a respected businessman. This is all her fault." She pointed at me with a shaking finger. "She's destroyed our family out of spite." "Ma'am, please put the papers down," Detective Mitchell instructed. "Those are evidence now." "Evidence of what? Of a daughter betraying her parents? Of an ungrateful child who—" "Janet Brennan," Detective Coleman interrupted. "You're also under arrest for fraud, identity theft, forgery, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." The sound of Mom being read her rights was surreal. This woman who'd controlled every aspect of my childhood with iron precision was being handcuffed in her own dining room. My dining room, while sobbing about the unfairness of it all. Through the window, I could see more drama unfolding outside. Marcus had apparently tried to make a run for his BMW, but Officer Paulson had blocked his path. They were engaged in what looked like an intense negotiation with Marcus, gesturing wildly while the officer remained stone-faced. "Where's the fourth individual?" Detective Coleman asked me. "The girlfriend?" We found Stephanie in the upstairs bathroom doors locked, crying hysterically on the phone with her mother. It took 10 minutes of gentle coaxing from Detective Coleman to get her to open the door. When she finally emerged, her perfect makeup was destroyed, and she looked like a completely different person from the confident woman I'd met just hours ago. "I didn't know," she kept repeating. "He told me his family owned everything. I'm 7 months pregnant. I can't go to jail." "Ma'am, you're not under arrest," Detective Coleman assured her. "We just need to ask you some questions. Do you have somewhere safe to go tonight?" Stephanie nodded numbly. My parents live in Westchester, but I don't understand what's happening. Marcus said we were going to raise our baby here. He showed me bank statements proved he could support us." "Those bank statements might be evidence," Detective Mitchell said gently. "Can you show us what he showed you?" As Stephanie retrieved her phone to show the officers the documents Marcus had used to convince her of his wealth, I heard a commotion from outside. Marcus's negotiation with Officer Paulson had apparently failed, and he was being placed in handcuffs while shouting about lawsuits and false imprisonment. Detective Coleman turned to me. "Ms. Brennan, we'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to give a full statement. Mr. Fitzgerald will meet us there with all the documentation. For tonight, we recommend you don't stay here. Is there somewhere else you can go?" I nodded, relief washing over me. "I have my apartment. I need to get a few things from the house first. Family photos, some of Grandma Rose's belongings that are mine anyway." "Of course. Officer Chen will accompany you for your safety. Take only personal items that clearly belong to you. Anything that might be evidence needs to stay for now." Officer Chen was a young woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else than in the middle of a family implosion. She followed me through the house as I gathered precious items. Grandma Rose's jewelry box, photo albums from before the favoritism became too obvious to ignore, my high school diploma, and awards that had been relegated to a box in the basement. In what used to be my room, I found something that made me pause. Hidden behind Marcus's weight bench was a small painting I'd made in elementary school. A watercolor of our family standing in front of the house. I'd painted myself holding Grandma Rose's hand while my parents and baby Marcus stood separately. Even at age 7, I'd known where I belonged. "That's sweet," Officer Chen said softly, then caught herself. "Sorry, I shouldn't comment." "It's okay," I said carefully, wrapping the painting. "It's probably the last honest portrait of this family anyone ever made." As we returned downstairs, paramedics had arrived to check on Stephanie. Her panic had triggered what looked like Braxton Hicks contractions, and they wanted to monitor her before releasing her to her parents. She sat on the couch, looking lost and young, rubbing her belly while tears streamed down her face. "Dusty," she called out weakly as I passed. Can I talk to you for a second?" I paused, then nodded. Officer Chen stepped back to give us a bit of privacy while staying close enough to intervene if needed. "I'm sorry," Stephanie whispered. "He told me you were crazy, that you were jealous of him, that you tried to hurt the family before. I believed him because he was so convincing. He showed me fake medical records saying you'd been in psychiatric hospitals. He forged those too. I wasn't even surprised anymore. Stephanie, listen to me. You're young. You're pregnant, and you've been lied to. Don't let this define your life. Get away from him, raise your baby with your parents' help, and build something better than this." She nodded, fresh tears falling. "He's not who I thought he was. None of this is what I thought it was." "It never is with them," I said. "They're very good at creating illusions. I believed in them for 28 years. Outside, the circus continued. Mrs. Chen from next door had given up all pretense and was standing on her lawn in her bathrobe, recording everything on her phone. Other neighbors had gathered in small groups, whispering and pointing. By tomorrow, this would be on every local social media page. Richard and Janet were loaded into separate patrol cars, both still protesting their innocence. Richard kept shouting about calling his lawyer, apparently forgetting that his lawyer was likely to distance himself once he learned about the criminal charges. Janet had gone silent, staring straight ahead, with empty eyes, her carefully constructed world in ruins. Marcus was in the third patrol car, and as it pulled away, we made eye contact through the window. For just a moment, I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Real, genuine fear. The golden boy who'd never faced a consequence in his life was finally going to learn what accountability meant. Detective Coleman approached me one last time. "We'll have officers do periodic checks on the property tonight. The locks should be changed first thing tomorrow. I can recommend a reliable company that works with law enforcement." "Thank you," I said, meaning it, for everything. I wasn't sure anyone would take this seriously. "Financial crimes within families are more common than people think," she said, "and often the most devastating. Your grandmother was smart to document everything. Without her foresight, this would have been much harder to prove." As the last patrol car pulled away, I stood on the lawn of the house I'd grown up in, but never truly belonged to. The porch light was still on, illuminating the front door I'd walked through thousands of times as an unwelcome guest in what was actually my own home. Tomorrow there would be lawyer meetings and police statements. Tomorrow I'd have to figure out what to do with a house full of bad memories. Tomorrow I'd need to process the reality that the people who were supposed to love me most had been planning to destroy me. But Tonight, I was going back to my tiny apartment above the bakery where the smell of fresh bread was better than any pot roast dinner where every stick of furniture was bought with money I'd earned honestly, where I could finally exhale without wondering what price I'd pay for taking up space. As I drove away, I didn't look back at the house, but I did catch a glimpse of Mrs. Chen in my rearview mirror, already on her phone, undoubtedly sharing the scandal with her entire contact list. By morning, everyone would know what happened at 47 Maple Street. The Brennan family's carefully maintained image was shattered beyond repair, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care what anyone thought. I was free. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes you feel like the universe hit a reset button. I'd barely slept, but what little rest I got was the deepest I'd had in years. There's something about finally fighting back that releases tension you didn't even know you were carrying. I met Harold Fitzgerald at his office at 8 sharp. He had coffee waiting, the good kind, not the bitter brew I was used to from the hospital break room, and a smile that told me things were going even better than expected. "The police called me last night after booking your family," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. "Your brother Marcus tried to cut a deal before they even finished processing him. He's offering to testify against your parents in exchange for leniency." "Of course he is," I muttered, unsurprised that Marcus would throw anyone under the bus to save himself. What else did they find? Harold's expression turned grim. "That's what I wanted to discuss. The security system you installed. You said it's been recording for 6 months. I nodded. Motion-activated cameras in all common areas, plus continuous recording in the office and near the safe. Everything uploads to a cloud server automatically. We need to review that footage immediately. The detectives want to build an airtight case, and video evidence would be invaluable." I pulled out my laptop, logging into the secure server where months of recordings waited like a digital time bomb. Harold called in his paralegal Grace Martinez to help us review and catalog everything. What we found over the next 4 hours made the previous night's revelations look tame by comparison. The first significant footage was from 3 months ago. Marcus was in Richard's office with 2 men I didn't recognize, one in an expensive suit, the other looking like he'd stepped out of a mob movie. The audio was crystal clear. "The property's worth at least $800,000 in this market," suit guy was saying. "Once your sister is out, we can have it demolished and build 4 units. My investors are ready to move." She'll be out by January, Marcus assured them. We've got plans to make her life so miserable she'll leave on her own. If not, he made a gesture that chilled my blood. Nothing violent, Mob Guy warned. That brings too much attention, but there are other ways to make someone disappear from their life. Grace gasped beside me. That sounds like conspiracy to commit harassment at minimum, possibly worse. We marked the timestamp and moved on. 2 weeks later, there was footage of my mother in my old room, now Marcus's workout space, going through boxes of my belongings. She pulled out journals I'd kept in high school, flipping through pages with a nasty smile. Perfect, she muttered to herself, tearing out several pages. Let's see how she explains these to a psychiatrist. She was planning to use my teenage angst against me. I couldn't believe it. Those journals were private. Harold made notes rapidly. Theft of personal property, conspiracy to commit fraud. This is damning. But the worst was yet to come. 1 month ago at 2 a.m, the cameras captured Richard meeting with someone in the garage. The man handed him a small bottle. This is untraceable, the stranger said. Small doses over time. She'll get sick gradually. Fatigue, confusion, memory problems. Everyone will think it's stress or mental illness. After a few months, she won't be able to fight anything. My hand shook as I realized what I was watching. They weren't just planning to steal from me or evict me, they were planning to poison me. We're stopping right here, Harold said firmly, reaching for his phone. This is attempted murder conspiracy. The FBI needs to see this immediately. While he made calls, Grace and I continued reviewing footage. We found Marcus stealing from Grandma Rose's room after her funeral, carefully taking jewelry and small valuables he could easily sell. We saw my parents practicing their concerned family act, literally rehearsing lines about my supposed mental instability. Remember to cry when you mention her paranoia, Mom coached Richard. It needs to look like we're heartbroken about her condition. There was footage of them meeting with Dr. Patricia Henley, a psychiatrist known for taking cash bribes to write whatever diagnosis families wanted. They handed her an envelope thick with cash and a folder of the forged medical documents they'd created about me. I'll need to examine her at least once to make it legal, Dr. Henley said. Can you get her to come in voluntarily? We'll tell her it's a family therapy session, Mom replied. She's stupid enough to fall for it if we act sorry enough. By noon, we had compiled dozens of criminal conspiracies, each one more shocking than the last. The FBI arrived in the form of Special Agents Diana Torres and Michael Washington, who took over the conference room to review everything. Ms. Brennan, Agent Torres said, after watching the poison conspiracy footage, "We're going to need to place you in protective custody. These aren't just financial crimes anymore. There's a credible threat to your life." No, I said firmly. I'm not hiding. I have work, I have school, I have a life they've already tried to destroy. I won't let them take anything else from me. Agent Washington looked like he wanted to argue, but Harold intervened. My client has a point. She's safer in public than hidden away, but we can arrange for security. They compromised by assigning an undercover officer to shadow me and installing a panic button app on my phone. It felt surreal, like I'd stepped into a crime thriller instead of my own life. The footage revealed other victims too. Marcus had been running a side scheme at his job, using his position to manipulate elderly clients into bad investments that benefited him. He'd stolen over $300,000 from retirees who trusted him. One of these victims is my aunt, Grace said quietly, pointing to a name on the client list. She lost her entire retirement savings last year. We thought it was just a bad investment decision. There was also footage of Stephanie, poor naive Stephanie, being systematically isolated from her support system. Marcus deleted texts from her friends, blocked numbers on her phone while she slept, and told elaborate lies about why people had abandoned her. Classic abuser tactics executed with the same cold precision the family had used on me. But perhaps the most satisfying discovery was finding the cameras had captured Marcus's affair with my supposed best friend, Melissa. not just captured, recorded in high definition, including their pillow talk about how gullible I was. She actually thinks I care about her problems. Melissa laughed naked in my childhood bed while Marcus traced patterns on her skin. Yesterday, she was crying about you all planning something, and I just kept telling her she was being paranoid. She trusts me completely. Good, Marcus replied. Keep her distracted. Once she's gone, maybe you can move in here. My parents love you more than they ever loved her anyway. The betrayal burned, but it also freed me. Every person I trusted had been working against me, which meant I owed loyalty to none of them. Agent Torres returned from making phone calls with a grim expression. The man your father met with about the poison, he's already in our system. Professional hitman who specializes in making deaths look natural. We've been trying to nail him for years. So my father literally hired a hitman to kill me slowly. The words sounded absurd even as I said them. That's what the evidence suggests. The good news is, this gives us leverage. Your father will likely flip on his criminal connections to avoid a murder conspiracy charge. The afternoon brought a steady stream of law enforcement officials, each discovering new crimes in the footage. Detective Coleman arrived to inform me that the search of the house had uncovered even more evidence. Hidden safes with cash from their various schemes, forged documents for dozens of victims, and a literal murder board in the basement with my daily routines mapped out. They'd been planning this for at least a year, she said, showing me photos of the board. Your schedule, your friends' names, your doctors. They were looking for the perfect opportunity to either discredit you or kill me, I finished. My own family was planning to kill me for a house and some money. But there was one more surprise waiting in the security footage. Grace found it while reviewing the last week's recordings. Grandma Rose's friend, Margaret Hartwell, sitting in her car outside the house at 3 a.m, just watching. Wait, I said, leaning closer to the screen. That's Thomas Hartwell's wife, the senator who's my biological father. What was she doing there? We found 3 more instances of her late-night vigils over the past month. Each time she'd sit for about an hour sometimes, crying sometimes on the phone, always leaving before dawn. Harold immediately called the Hartwell estate. Within an hour, Margaret and Thomas were in his office looking dignified but nervous. Thomas was exactly what you'd expect from a successful politician. Silver-haired, well-dressed, with eyes that assessed everything. But when he looked at me, his composure cracked. My God, he whispered. You look just like my mother when she was young. Margaret reached over and squeezed his hand, then turned to me. I've been watching over you. I know how that sounds, but after we learned the truth, I couldn't stay away. I needed to make sure you were safe. You knew they were dangerous. I suspected, she admitted. That's why I pushed Rose to investigate your family's finances. I'd heard rumors about Richard's business practices, and I worried. Well, I worried about you. Thomas cleared his throat, visibly emotional. 29 years. Janet kept you from me for 29 years. I would have, if I'd known, you would have what I asked, needing to hear it. I would have fought for you, divorced my wife if necessary, faced the scandal, whatever it took. A child deserves to know their father. He looked at Margaret. We both would have welcomed you. It was Margaret's response that broke through my defensive walls. We never had children. Couldn't. Finding out about you, it's like discovering we had a daughter all along, one who was stolen from us. The meeting was interrupted by Harold's paralegal bursting in. Sorry, but you need to see this. We found something in the timestamp gaps. She pulled up footage from a week ago showing someone disabling cameras throughout the house with professional precision. The figure was dressed in black, face obscured, but their movements were familiar. Enhanced audio picked up something, Grace said, playing the file. Through the static, we could hear the intruder muttering, almost time, just a few more days and this will all be over. The voice was electronically distorted, but something about the cadence, the way they moved through my childhood home with easy familiarity, sent chills down my spine. There's our professional, Agent Torres said grimly. Looks like they were doing reconnaissance for the murder attempt. But I was studying the footage with different eyes. Something about the intruder's gait, the way they favored their left leg slightly. An old injury from a skiing accident in college that never properly healed. Oh my God, I breathed. That's not a hired killer, that's Marcus. Everyone turned to stare at me. I pointed to the screen, tracking the figure's movement. See how he shifts his weight. He tore his ACL junior year and never got proper surgery because he spent the money. Mom and Dad gave him on a car instead. He's been disguising it for years, but when he thinks no one's watching. Agent Washington pulled up earlier footage of Marcus in the house comparing the gait patterns. Perfect match. Your brother was personally planning to murder you, he said slowly. This changes everything. He wasn't just going along with your parents' schemes. He was the mastermind. The weight of it all hit me then. My entire family, the people who were supposed to protect me, love me, support me, had been actively planning my death. Not just my removal from their lives, but my actual death. But as I sat in that conference room, surrounded by people who were fighting for me, Harold, the agents, the detectives, and surprisingly the biological father and stepmother I'd never known, I realized something powerful. They'd failed. Despite all their planning, all their schemes, all their hatred disguised as family obligation, I was still here, still breathing, still fighting. And now, with every camera angle and audio file added to the evidence, their own paranoid need to control everything had become the weapon that would destroy them. Grandma Rose had known exactly what she was doing when she suggested I install that security system during one of our last conversations. Document everything sweetly, she'd said. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, but sometimes you need video evidence to make people believe the infection exists. She'd known. Somehow she'd known it would come to this. And she'd made sure I'd be ready. The meeting with Thomas and Margaret Hartwell had been interrupted by the revelation about Marcus. But as the FBI agents rushed off to update their case files, we found ourselves sitting in a strange bubble of calm. Harold tactfully excused himself to give us privacy, though I suspected he was just outside the door in case I needed him. Thomas Hartwell looked nothing like the campaign photos I'd Googled after reading Grandma Rose's letter. Those showed a polished politician with a practiced smile. The man sitting across from me looked haunted, older, with worry lines that spoke of sleepless nights. I need you to understand, he began, voice thick with emotion. I've been searching for you for 5 years, ever since Janet sent that last blackmail demand. She was still blackmailing you? I couldn't hide my shock. Margaret nodded, her perfectly manicured hands folded tightly in her lap. She contacted Thomas 5 years ago, claiming she needed money for your medical school. Said you were sick, desperate that she'd tell you the truth about your father if he didn't pay. I was never sick, and she told me I couldn't afford medical school, that I wasn't smart enough anyway. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. I know that now, Thomas said quietly, but then I wired $50,000 to an offshore account. When I tried to follow up to insist on seeing you, she threatened to go public with edited photos from our college relationship. Things that would destroy not just my career, but Margaret's reputation too. That's when we hired our own investigator, Margaret interjected. We needed to know if you even existed, or if Janet was running an elaborate con. They told me about 3 years of dead ends. Janet had covered her tracks well using maiden names, false addresses, and a web of lies that would impress a spy novelist. Every time their investigator got close, she'd throw up another roadblock. We found out about Rose, your grandmother, through pure chance, Thomas continued. Margaret volunteers with the Literacy Foundation, and Rose was at a fundraiser. They got to talking about family, and Rose mentioned her granddaughter, who was working herself to death to become a nurse despite her family's lack of support. Margaret's eyes misted. The way she talked about you, with such pride and worry mixed together. I knew immediately you were Thomas's daughter. The timeline, the situation, even the way she described your determination. It all fit. So you approached her. Carefully, Margaret admitted. I couldn't tell her everything without proof, but I hinted that I might be able to help her granddaughter if she ever needed it. That's when Rose started opening up about her concerns. The story they told over the next hour painted a picture I'd never seen. While I'd been struggling through night shifts and double courses thinking I was alone except for Grandma Rose, Thomas, and Margaret had been fighting a shadow war against my mother's machinations. They'd tried to set up a scholarship fund for me, but Janet intercepted the application. They'd attempted to have trusted friends accidentally meet me and offer opportunities, but somehow I was always scheduled to work during those events. Every avenue they pursued hit a wall built by my mother's paranoia and greed. The most frustrating part, Thomas said, running his hands through his silver hair, was that we couldn't just approach you directly. Without proof of paternity, Janet could have painted us as delusional stalkers. A state senator showing up, claiming to be your father, the media would have destroyed all of us. So you waited, I said, understanding dawning. We waited and watched and searched for the proof we needed. Rose was gathering evidence for us too, though she was careful never to let on. She was remarkable, playing the feeble grandmother while documenting everything. A knock on the door interrupted us. Harold entered with a grim expression. I apologize, but there's been a development. The police just called. Marcus bonded out an hour ago. My blood ran cold. What? How is that possible with attempted murder charges? His lawyer argued the video evidence was illegally obtained since he wasn't notified about the cameras. The judge set $1 million bond. Someone paid it in cash. Who has that kind of money? I demanded, though I was afraid I knew the answer. Harold hesitated. The payment was made by a shell company, but the FBI is tracking it. In the meantime, there's a restraining order in place. He can't come within 500 feet of you. Thomas stood immediately. She's not safe. We have a security team. Private, discreet, the best in the business. Dusty, please let us protect you. Part of me wanted to refuse to handle this myself as I'd handled everything else, but the image of Marcus creeping through the house planning my murder made the decision for me. Okay, I agreed, but I'm not going into hiding. I have a life-work responsibilities. Of course, Margaret assured me. We're not suggesting witness protection, just precautions. While Thomas made phone calls, Margaret and I sat in awkward silence. Finally, she spoke. I know this is overwhelming. In one day, you've lost the family you knew and gained one you didn't know existed. We're strangers to you. Strangers who tried to help me, I pointed out. That's more than my actual family ever did. Her smile was sad but warm. Rose talked about you constantly at those fundraisers. Your strength, your compassion, how you'd work extra shifts to cover for sick colleagues. She was so proud and I was jealous of a grandmother's love for a granddaughter I couldn't claim. Thomas returned, pocketing his phone. Security will be in place within the hour. Now there's something else we need to discuss. Your inheritance from Rose. Did you check the safety deposit box yet? I shook my head. With everything that happened, I haven't had time. Go today, he urged. Rose told us she left something important there, something about your medical history that you'd need to know. My medical history. What could be so important that Grandma Rose kept it in a safety deposit box? Harold offered to accompany me to the bank, and Thomas insisted their security escort us. It felt like a presidential motorcade for a simple bank visit. But after learning about the murder plot, I wasn't complaining. First National Bank on Main Street was an old institution, all marble floors and hushed voices. The manager himself escorted us to the vault after verifying my documentation. Box 472 was larger than I'd expected, and heavier when I pulled it from its slot. In the private viewing room, I opened it with trembling hands. On top was an envelope labeled "Read First" in Grandma Rose's handwriting. Beneath were stacks of documents, photographs, and what looked like medical files. The letter was brief but devastating. My darling Dusty, if you're reading this, then you've discovered the truth about your parents and your paternity, but there's more you need to know. When you were 3, you were diagnosed with a rare kidney condition. The doctors said you'd need a transplant by age 30. Your parents hid this from you, hoping you'd die before you found out, ensuring they'd inherit everything. The medical records are all here. You're on a transplant list under a false name Janet created. She's been sabotaging your matches for years, intercepting calls from the hospital. Thomas is a perfect match. We had him tested secretly. He's ready to donate whenever you need it. Don't wait too long to get checked. Your health matters more than justice. All my love, Grandma Rose. The room spun. I gripped the table, Harold's voice sounding distant as he asked if I was okay. A kidney condition, hidden transplant list. My own mother actively preventing me from receiving life-saving treatment. With shaking hands, I pulled out the medical files. Everything was there. Test results from when I was a toddler specialist, recommendations, treatment plans, and a thick folder from the regional transplant center showing my status on their list. The most recent update was from 6 months ago. According to the notes, they tried to contact me about a potential donor match, but the phone number on file, my parents' landline, had resulted in being told I was no longer interested in treatment. She was letting me die, I whispered. All this time, she was literally letting me die. Harold was already on his phone with the hospital, while I sat frozen, staring at proof of yet another betrayal. They hadn't just wanted me out of the house. They wanted me dead, and they were willing to let nature take its course to make it happen. Thomas and Margaret rushed in after Harold called them. When they saw the medical files, Margaret broke down sobbing while Thomas went deadly quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded political careers being destroyed and legacies being ruined. "We're going to the hospital now," he said in a tone that brooked no argument. "You're getting a full evaluation today." Margaret called Dr. Morrison at Johns Hopkins. "Tell him we need the best nephrology team assembled immediately." "I can't afford," I started automatically. "You're our daughter," Thomas said firmly. "Biology, legal recognition, whatever else. None of that matters. You're our daughter, and we're going to make sure you live. The rest can be sorted out later." As we prepared to leave for the hospital, I noticed Harold studying another document from the safety deposit box. His expression was strange. Part amazement, part disbelief. "Dusty," he said slowly, "did you look at the investment portfolio Rose left you?" I shook my head, overwhelmed by the medical revelations. "You should." He handed me the paper. "Your grandmother was apparently quite the investor. This portfolio is worth approximately $12 million. $12 million. That's impossible," I breathed. "Grandma Rose lived simply. She clipped coupons." "She lived simply so she could invest everything else," Harold explained. "Started with a small inheritance from her father in the 60s, invested wisely, reinvested dividends. Compound interest over 50 years, plus some very shrewd tech investments in the 90s. It's all here. All legal, all properly documented, all yours." I laughed. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of it all. My family trying to kill me for a house worth $800,000 when I'd unknowingly been heir to millions. They'd risked everything, destroyed their own lives for what amounted to pocket change compared to what Grandma Rose had quietly built. There's more," Harold continued. "She left detailed instructions. Half is in a trust that pays for medical expenses and education. The rest is yours free and clear, but she included a list of suggestions, mostly charities she supported and hoped you would too." Among the papers was a photo I'd never seen. Grandma Rose as a young woman standing in front of the New York Stock Exchange, dressed in a simple suit, but with a fierce expression that I recognized. It was the same look she'd had when teaching me to play chess, to think 3 moves ahead of everyone else. She'd been playing a longer game than any of us realized. "We need to get to the hospital," Thomas said urgently. "The kidney function tests can't wait." As we left the bank, surrounded by security and carrying boxes of evidence of both love and betrayal, I realized the full scope of what had happened. My biological father had spent years searching for me. My stepmother had cried outside my house at 3 in the morning, worried about a daughter she'd never met. My grandmother had spent decades building a fortune in secret to protect me. Meanwhile, the family I'd grown up with had been planning my death, either through poison or medical neglect, for the price of a suburban house. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of irony. But as we drove to the hospital, Thomas and Margaret flanking me like protective angels, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 28 years: the unconditional support of parents who actually wanted me to live. The next 72 hours blurred together in a whirlwind of medical tests, legal procedures, and earth-shattering revelations. The kidney evaluation at Johns Hopkins confirmed what Grandma Rose's hidden medical files had revealed. I had polycystic kidney disease inherited from my biological father's side of the family. My function was at 30% and declining. "You should have been experiencing symptoms," Dr. Morrison explained, reviewing my test results with barely concealed alarm. "Fatigue, back pain, high blood pressure." "I thought it was just stress from working 3 jobs," I admitted. And when I mentioned feeling tired to my mother last year, she said I was being dramatic. Thomas's jaw clenched at that, while Margaret reached over to squeeze my hand. They'd barely left my side since the diagnosis, taking turns keeping vigil like they were making up for 28 lost years. But the medical crisis had to take a backseat when Harold called with urgent news. The FBI had raided Richard's construction company based on evidence from the security footage, and what they'd found was staggering. "You need to see this for yourself," Harold said when we met at his office. "Bring the Hartwells. This affects them too." The conference room table was covered with financial documents, photographs, and FBI evidence markers. Agent Torres was there, looking grimmer than I'd ever seen her. Brennan Construction wasn't just a front for tax evasion. She began without preamble. It was a full-scale money laundering operation for organized crime. "Your father, Richard, has been washing money for the Torino crime family for 15 years. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to process this information. The construction company that barely built anything was laundering mob money. "Approximately $2 million annually," Agent Torres confirmed. But here's where it gets worse. Marcus wasn't just his father's son in terms of fraud. He became the primary contact with the Torinos 3 years ago. He's been using his position at Harriman Financial to expand the operation. She pulled up financial records on her laptop, showing a complex web of transactions: shell companies, offshore accounts, cryptocurrency conversions. It was like a master class in financial crime. "Every renovation your parents did on the house paid for with laundered money. Marcus's education mob-funded. That $1 million bail bond, the Torinos posted it." My stomach turned. I'd grown up in a house built on blood money, surrounded by luxury purchased with human suffering. But wait, Thomas interjected, his political instincts sharp. If they were making that kind of money from laundering, why try to steal Dusty's inheritance? Why risk everything for a few $100,000? Agent Torres pulled up another document. Because they weren't just laundering anymore. They were stealing from the Torinos. The evidence was damning. Marcus had been skimming from the laundered funds, convinced he could hide it in the complexity of the transactions. Richard had been inflating construction costs, pocketing the difference. Together, they'd stolen nearly $800,000 from one of the most dangerous crime families on the East Coast. "They needed your trust fund to pay it back," Agent Torres explained. "The house equity was going to be at their emergency fund if the Torinos discovered the theft. Your death would have given them everything they needed to cover their tracks. So they were willing to kill me to save themselves from the mob they'd betrayed." The laugh that escaped me was hollow. That's almost poetic in its awfulness. Harold pulled out another folder. "There's more. We've been going through Brennan Construction's employee records. Several workers who threatened to report safety violations or wage theft mysteriously disappeared over the years. The FBI is treating them as potential homicides. Margaret gasped. They were murderers, not just planning it, but actual murderers. Alleged, Agent Torres corrected carefully, but we have enough circumstantial evidence to investigate. One worker, Miguel Reyes, left a video message for his wife before disappearing. He said Richard had threatened his family if he reported the unsafe working conditions that had injured 3 men. I remembered Miguel. He'd done renovation work on our house when I was in high school. A kind man who'd snuck me homemade tamales when he learned I was working nights to pay for SAT prep. He'd vanished one day, and Richard had said he'd gone back to Mexico. Miguel had 2 daughters, I said quietly, Sofia and Isabella. They were in elementary school. We're trying to locate the family now, Agent Torres assured me. If Richard was involved in his disappearance, we'll find out. The meeting was interrupted by Harold's paralegal bursting in. Sorry, but there's someone here demanding to see Ms. Brennan. She says she's Marcus's girlfriend. Stephanie. I'd almost forgotten about her in the chaos. Against Harold's advice, I agreed to see her. She looked terrible. Hollow-eyed, makeup-free, wearing sweatpants that had seen better days. Her pregnancy seemed to have advanced a month in just 3 days. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, she began, clutching a manila folder, but I found something you need to know about, something Marcus hid in our apartment. She handed me the folder with shaking hands. Inside were photographs, documents, and what looked like surveillance reports, all focused on me. But these weren't recent. Some photos showed me in high school, others in my early college years. He's been stalking you since you were 16, Stephanie explained. There are notebooks full of your schedules, your friends' names, even records of your menstrual cycle. It's sick, Dusty. He was obsessed with you. I flipped through the images, nausea rising. Photos taken through my bedroom window, notes about my daily routines, records of every person I dated with background checks and threat assessments. Thomas took the folder from my trembling hands, his face darkening as he reviewed the contents. This is evidence of long-term stalking and conspiracy. He was planning something for over a decade. There's worse, Stephanie continued, tears streaming down her face. I found videos on his computer, hidden files showing him in your room while you slept, dozens of them going back years. I ran to Harold's private bathroom and was violently sick. My own brother had been violating my privacy, my safety, my very sense of self for over a decade. The betrayal was so profound it felt like drowning in acid. When I returned, Agent Torres had taken possession of the evidence. This changes the nature of the investigation. We're no longer looking at just financial crimes and conspiracy. This is evidence of long-term predatory behavior. Why, I asked Stephanie, do the files say why he was doing this? She nodded miserably. There was a journal. He wrote about how you were supposed to be weak, supposed to fail, but you kept succeeding. Every achievement you had, every time you overcame something they threw at you, it made him angrier. He wrote that you were ruining the natural order that you needed to be put in your place. And that place was dead, Thomas said flatly. Eventually, yes. But first, he wanted to break you. The stalking, the gaslighting, the theft. It was all about proving he was superior. When that didn't work, she gestured helplessly. Margaret had been silent throughout this revelation, but now she spoke up. Where is Marcus now? Stephanie shrugged. I don't know. I left him. My parents hired a lawyer and I'm filing for a restraining order. I'm not raising my baby anywhere near that monster. Good, I said, meaning it. Protect yourself and your child. That's what matters now. After she left, we sat in stunned silence. The scope of the criminality kept expanding like a malignant tumor touching everything in my family's life. Agent Torres's phone rang. She stepped out to take it, returning with an expression that made everyone tense. We just arrested Dr. Patricia Henley. she announced. "The psychiatrist your parents were paying to declare you mentally incompetent. She's agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. Apparently, yours wasn't the first family to hire her for false commitments." "How many victims?" Harold asked. "At least 30 over the past decade. Adult children whose parents wanted to control their inheritances, spouses who knew too much about family businesses, whistleblowers who threatened to expose crimes. She was running a boutique service for wealthy criminals." The pieces kept falling into place. Every professional they'd hired, every expert they'd consulted had been part of a vast network of corruption. The construction company connected to organized crime, the psychiatrist selling false diagnoses, the lawyer preparing fraudulent documents. "Your family wasn't just criminal," Agent Torres explained. "They were part of an entire ecosystem of white-collar crime. We're looking at a RICO case now." Thomas leaned forward. "What does this mean for Dusty's safety if organized crime is involved?" "We've reached out to our contacts in the Torino organization," Agent Torres said carefully. "Surprisingly, they're not interested in Dusty. Apparently, they have a code about not targeting innocent family members. They want Richard and Marcus for the theft, but they've indicated she's not a target." "Indicated how?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know. "A package was delivered to FBI headquarters this morning. It contained all the evidence of Richard and Marcus's skimming, along with a note saying, 'The daughter is not her father's sins.' Old school, but clear." Even the mob had more honor than my family. The rest of the day was spent documenting everything for the expanding investigation. By evening, the FBI had enough evidence to charge Richard and Marcus with dozens of federal crimes. Mom's charges had expanded to include conspiracy and money laundering. Even their lawyer Brennan and Associates, no relation despite the name, was under investigation. As I sat in my tiny apartment that night, surrounded by security provided by the Hartwells and trying to process everything, my phone rang with an unknown number. "Don't hang up," Marcus's voice said quickly. "I just wanted you to know it's not over. You think you've won, but you've just signed your death warrant. The Torinos, the FBI, even your precious new daddy. None of them can protect you forever." "Marcus," I started, but he'd already hung up. I immediately called Agent Torres, who assured me they were tracing the call, but his words echoed in my mind. He was out there somewhere with $1 million in mob money and a decade's worth of obsessive rage. My family home had been built on crimes I was only beginning to understand. The construction company that supposedly provided our middle-class lifestyle was a front for money laundering, theft, and possibly murder. Every dollar spent on Marcus's privileges had been soaked in blood and betrayal. And somewhere in the city, my brother was planning his next move in a game that had apparently been going on since I was 16 years old. But I had something now that I'd never had before. Truth. The truth about my family, my health, my inheritance, and my real worth. Armed with that truth and supported by people who actually wanted me to live, I was ready for whatever came next. The Brennan construction empire was crumbling, and I was determined to make sure every last brick of it fell. The call from Harold at 6 a.m. could only mean one thing: another bombshell in the ever-expanding crater of my family's crimes. But his voice held something different this time, excitement rather than dread. "Can you come to the office immediately? Bring the Hartwells. We've had a breakthrough with the stolen trust funds." An hour later, we sat around Harold's conference table while Patricia Wong, a forensic accountant who looked like she could audit the devil himself, spread out her findings. Her presentation was meticulous, each stolen penny tracked across years of transactions. "Your parents were amateurs," she began, which seemed like an understatement given everything else we discovered. "They left digital fingerprints everywhere. Every forged signature, every unauthorized transfer, every falsified document. It's all traceable." The numbers were staggering. Over 10 years, they'd stolen $437,000 from my education trust. But that was just the beginning. Here's where it gets interesting. Patricia continued pulling up a complex flowchart. Your grandmother, Rose, set up multiple trusts, not just one. There's the education trust they raided, but also a medical trust they couldn't access, an investment trust that required biometric authentication, and something called the Phoenix Trust. Phoenix Trust. I'd never heard of it. Patricia smiled. Rose was clever. She knew your parents would likely discover and drain any trust they could access, so she created decoy trusts with smaller amounts while hiding the real wealth in instruments that required your physical presence to access. She showed us the documentation. The Phoenix Trust, named for rising from ashes, contained the bulk of my inheritance. Not just the $12 million in investments Harold had mentioned, but also real estate holdings, art collections, and intellectual property rights to several patents Grandma Rose had quietly acquired. Total value as of today's market. Patricia paused for effect. Approximately $23 million. Thomas whistled low. Rose was building an empire while pretending to clip coupons. But here's the beautiful part, Patricia continued. Every attempt your parents made to access the Phoenix Trust triggered documentation requirements. They tried 17 times over 5 years, and each attempt is logged recorded, and evidence of attempted fraud. Margaret leaned forward. Can we recover what they stole from the education trust? Every penny, Patricia assured us, plus interest, plus penalties. Your parents' assets are already frozen, but we've tracked down offshore accounts, hidden investments, and property holdings they thought were untraceable. Richard apparently bought 2 rental properties in Florida under a shell company paying cash from your trust fund. The recovery process was complex but satisfying. Patricia had worked with the FBI to freeze accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and even a cryptocurrency wallet Marcus thought was anonymous. Each discovery painted a picture of greed, so consuming it had made them reckless. There's something else, Harold interjected. The FBI found a safe deposit box Richard kept at a different bank. Inside were documents related to other family members he'd defrauded. Agent Torres, who joined us for this meeting, laid out the evidence. Your Aunt Patricia in California. Richard stole her portion of your grandfather's estate by forging her signature on sale documents. Your mother's elderly aunt in the nursing home. They've been collecting her Social Security checks for 3 years, telling the home she's paying cash. How many victims are there? I asked, overwhelmed by the scope. At least 12 family members that we've confirmed. The total theft exceeds $2 million, not counting what they took from you. But the most shocking revelation came from an unexpected source. The bank manager at First National, reviewing old records, had discovered that Grandma Rose had been documenting the family's crimes for decades. She'd kept meticulous records of every suspicious transaction, every forged document, every lie told. She would come in monthly, the manager explained over speakerphone. Always asked for copies of all statements, said she liked to keep paper records, but she was building a case. She knew what they were doing and was gathering evidence. Patricia pulled up one final document. This is my favorite discovery. Marcus has been filing tax returns claiming massive charitable deductions. He's been donating to a charity called the Brennan Family Foundation. Let me guess, Thomas said dryly. The foundation doesn't exist. Oh, it exists. Patricia smiled. Rose created it, legally properly with herself and Dusty as the only board members. Every donation Marcus made thinking he was funding his own tax shelter went directly into an account Rose controlled. She used that money to help your other relatives, the ones Richard was stealing from. I laughed despite everything. Even in death, Grandma Rose was playing chess while everyone else played checkers. She'd turned their own greed into a weapon against them. The meeting was interrupted by Harold's paralegal. There's a Daniel Torino here. He says he has an appointment. Everyone tensed. The Torino crime family wanting a face-to-face meeting couldn't be good, but Agent Torres nodded. I arranged this. Mr. Torino has information relevant to the case. Daniel Torino wasn't what I expected from a mob lawyer. Young, impeccably dressed with an Ivy League bearing that seemed at odds with his family name. He sat down with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how much power he wielded. Ms. Brennan, he began, his voice cultured and calm. I'm here on behalf of my family to clarify our position and provide some information you need. I'm listening, I said, trying to match his composure. First, let me reiterate. You are not and never will be a target. My grandfather has very specific rules about innocence, especially those who were victims of their own family's crimes. Second, we have information about your brother's current activities that you need to know. He pulled out a tablet showing surveillance footage from what looked like a warehouse. Marcus approached some of our associates yesterday, trying to hire them for a hit on you. He offered the $1 million from his bail. My blood ran cold, but Daniel continued calmly. My grandfather was insulted. We don't kill innocent women for spoiled boys' tantrums. Marcus was politely but firmly declined. However, he's shopping around to other less scrupulous organizations. Why are you telling me this? Thomas demanded. Daniel's smile was sharp. Because Marcus and Richard owe us $800,000. Dead men can't pay debts. We want them alive and in prison where they can work off what they owe. Your daughter's safety serves our interests. He slid a flash drive across the table. This contains all our surveillance on Marcus for the past 72 hours. His contacts, his movements, his plans. We believe he's planning something for tonight. Agent Torres immediately took possession of the drive. What kind of something? He's acquired accelerants and timing devices. We believe he intends to burn down the house on Maple Street. He seems to think destroying the physical evidence will somehow save him. My childhood home. Despite everything, the thought of it burning hurt. Not because of my family, but because of Grandma Rose. Her garden, her kitchen, where she taught me to bake, her reading nook, where she told me stories. We'll have units there immediately, Agent Torres promised. Daniel stood to leave but paused. Miss Brennan, a word of advice from someone who understands complicated families. The best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's living well despite them. Your grandmother understood that. She built an empire while they schemed in shadows. After he left, we sat in stunned silence. Even organized crime had more honor than my family. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of legal procedures. Patricia Wong worked with federal authorities to begin the asset recovery process. Every hidden account was tracked, every property identified, every fraudulent transaction documented. By afternoon, we had a complete picture. Richard and Janet had property in Florida, Texas, and Maryland, all purchased with stolen funds. Marcus had investment accounts totaling over $2 million funded entirely by money laundering and embezzlement from his elderly clients at Harriman Financial. We can seize all of it, Agent Torres explained. Under RICO statutes, any assets derived from criminal enterprise are subject to forfeiture. You'll receive full restitution for what was stolen plus damages. But the most satisfying moment came when Patricia discovered one final account. A college fund Richard had set up for Marcus's future children, funded entirely with money stolen from my trust. Poetic justice, Thomas murmured. He stole from you to secure his grandchildren's future. Oh, speaking of grandchildren, Margaret interjected gently, have you heard from Stephanie? I had. She'd texted that morning asking if we could meet. Despite my better judgment, I'd agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown Security, discreetly watching from nearby tables. Stephanie looked better than she had 3 days ago. Her parents' support had clearly helped, though the strain showed in her eyes. She pushed a small box across the table. I found this in Marcus's things. I think it belongs to you. Inside was Grandma Rose's wedding ring, the one that had mysteriously disappeared after her funeral. Marcus had stolen even that, the sentimental value meaningless to him, compared to its monetary worth. I'm sorry, Stephanie said quietly, for believing him, for participating in trying to hurt you. I was so desperate to belong somewhere, to have the perfect family. You were a victim too, I told her honestly. He isolated you, manipulated, you made you dependent. That's what abusers do. She nodded, tears falling. My baby, what do I tell her about her father when she's older? The truth, I said simply, age appropriately, but the truth, she deserves to know where she comes from so she can choose who she becomes. We parted with an understanding that we'd never be friends, but didn't need to be enemies. She was choosing to protect her child, and I respected that. As evening approached, word came that Marcus had been arrested attempting to break into the house on Maple Street with accelerants. The security system I'd installed had alerted police the moment he'd breached the property line. He'd fought arrest, screaming about his birthright and how I destroyed everything. He'll be held without bail this time, Agent Torres assured me. Between violating the restraining order, attempting arson, and the new evidence of long-term stalking, no judge will release him. The house was safe, but more importantly, the evidence inside remained intact. Every crime scene photo, every financial document, every piece of proof that would ensure justice was served. As I sat in Harold's office watching the sun set over the city surrounded by people who actually cared about my well-being, I thought about transformation. My family had tried to bury me under their crimes, their greed, their hatred. Instead, they'd planted a seed that grew into something stronger. The Phoenix Trust was aptly named. I was rising from the ashes of their destruction, not just surviving, but thriving. $23 million in assets, a biological father who'd searched for me for years, a stepmother who'd cried for a daughter she'd never met, and most importantly, the truth. Every penny would be recovered, every crime would be punished, every victim would be compensated. And somewhere in her final rest, I knew Grandma Rose was smiling. She'd played the longest game of all, ensuring that love and justice would outlast greed and cruelty. The recovery wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming every piece of myself they'd tried to steal, every dream they'd tried to crush, every hope they'd tried to extinguish. And with the Phoenix Trust fully under my control, I had the resources to not just recover, but to soar. 6 weeks later, I sat in the prosecuting attorney's office, reviewing my testimony for the dozenth time. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the next morning, and while the evidence was overwhelming, the prosecutor, Diana Castellanos, wanted to ensure we were prepared for any defense tactics. They've hired separate attorneys, she explained, spreading out 3 folders. Richard has Martin Ashford, old school connected, specializes in organized crime defenses. Janet hired Sylvia Chen, who's known for playing the emotional card with juries. And Marcus? She paused, shaking her head. Marcus is representing himself. He's what Thomas, who'd accompanied me to every meeting, looked incredulous. That's insane. That's Marcus, I said quietly. He always believed he was smarter than everyone else. Diana pulled up the security footage on her laptop. We'll be playing excerpts of this during the hearing. I need to warn you, Dusty. It's going to be difficult to watch. The conspiracy discussions, the stalking videos, all of it will be public record. I nodded, steeling myself. The past 6 weeks had been a whirlwind of medical treatments. My kidney function had stabilized with proper medication. Therapy sessions. Turns out discovering your family planned to murder you requires professional help to process and legal preparations. Through it all, Thomas and Margaret had been rocks of support, while Harold worked tirelessly to secure my inheritance and help other victims of my family's crimes. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and drizzling, pathetic fallacy at its finest. The courthouse was surrounded by media. Apparently, the story of a family's financial crimes expanding into attempted murder was ratings gold. I kept my head down, flanked by security, as we made our way inside. The courtroom was packed. I recognized several faces. Neighbors from Maple Street, former employees of Brennan Construction, and in the back row, some of Marcus's elderly victims from Harriman Financial. Stephanie sat with her parents, her pregnancy now clearly visible, her face a mask of determination. When they brought in my family, I barely recognized them. 6 weeks in custody had stripped away their masks of respectability. Richard's designer suits were replaced with orange jumpsuit, his commanding presence reduced to shuffling steps in shackles. Janet's perfect hair was gray at the roots, her face bare of the makeup she'd worn like armor. But it was Marcus who looked the most changed, hollow-eyed, twitching with the manic energy of someone whose worldview had shattered. Judge Patricia Thornton, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, called the hearing to order. What followed was a systematic destruction of my family's claims of innocence. Diana presented the evidence chronologically, building a narrative that left no room for doubt. The financial crimes came first. Bank statements forged, signatures, expert testimony confirming the fraud. Patricia Wong testified with the precision of a surgeon dissecting each transaction. The pattern is clear, she stated. Over 10 years, the defendants systematically stole from multiple trust funds using increasingly sophisticated methods to hide their crimes. The total theft from Ms. Brennan alone exceeds $400,000. Richard's attorney tried to argue that as parents, they had a right to manage their daughter's finances. Judge Thornton's expression could have frozen hell. Mr. Ashford, are you seriously arguing that parents have the right to steal from their adult children? Please clarify your position for the court. The financial crimes were damning enough, but when Diana moved to the conspiracy charges, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from shocking to horrifying. The security footage played on large screens, every word crystal clear. We watched Richard meeting with the hitman discussing poison dosages. We saw Janet practicing her concerned mother act. We witnessed Marcus sneaking through the house, documenting my routines for future attacks. The courtroom was silent, except for occasional gasps from the gallery. Your Honor, Diana said, the evidence shows a systematic plan to murder Ms. Brennan for financial gain. This wasn't a moment of anger or a poorly considered threat. This was premeditated, attempted murder planned over months, possibly years. That's when Marcus decided to represent himself. He stood abruptly, ignoring the bailiff's warning. This is all taken out of context, he shouted. She's manipulating everything. Dusty has always been jealous of me, always tried to turn our parents against me. This is her revenge for being the unfavorite child. Judge Thornton's gavel cracked like thunder. Mr. Brennan, you will address the court properly or you will mark be removed. Do you have any actual legal argument to present? Marcus launched into a rambling speech about family loyalty, his birthright, and how I'd stolen what was rightfully his. The more he talked, the more unhinged he sounded. When he started describing his years of surveillance as protective watching over an unstable sister, even his parents looked horrified. I have videos proving she's mentally ill, he declared. Years of documentation showing her erratic behavior, her inability to maintain relationships, her paranoid delusions about our family. You mean the stalking videos? Diana asked calmly. The ones where you filmed Ms. Brennan sleeping without her knowledge. Those videos? Marcus's face went red. I was protecting her. Someone had to watch her, make sure she didn't hurt herself or embarrass the family. She never appreciated everything I did for her. It was Janet who broke next. Maybe it was seeing her son reveal his true nature so publicly, or maybe it was the weight of evidence. But she suddenly stood. I want to change my plea, she announced, her voice shaking. I'll testify. I'll tell you everything, but I want a deal. Her attorney, Sylvia Chen, looked like she wanted to tackle her client, but Janet continued. It was Richard's idea originally, but Marcus was the one who pushed for the permanent solution. I just wanted her gone, not dead. I swear I didn't know about the poison until... Shut up, Richard roared, lunging toward her despite his shackles. You stupid woman, keep your mouth shut. The bailiffs restrained him as the courtroom erupted. Judge Thornton hammered her gavel repeatedly, threatening to clear the room. When order was finally restored, she addressed Janet directly. Mrs. Brennan, any plea discussions will happen through your attorney in the proper channels. However, your statement has been noted for the record. The rest of the hearing proceeded with brutal efficiency. Detective Coleman testified about the expanding investigation, including the missing Brennan construction workers, now presumed dead. Agent Torres detailed the money laundering operation and connections to organized crime. Even Daniel Torino's surveillance footage was admitted, showing Marcus desperately trying to hire hitmen after making bail. But the most powerful testimony came from unexpected sources. Stephanie took the stand, her voice steady despite visible trembling. Marcus isolated me from everyone I knew, she testified. He deleted messages, blocked numbers, told me my friends and family were toxic. By the time I was pregnant, he was all I had. He told me Dusty was dangerous, showed me fake medical records, said we needed to get her out of the house for our baby's safety. I believed him because I was scared and alone, and he was so convincing. One of Marcus's elderly victims, an 80-year-old widow named Dorothy Patterson, testified about how he'd convinced her to invest her late husband's life insurance in a special fund that didn't exist. He was so charming, she said, tears streaming down her weathered face. He said he thought of me like a grandmother. I trusted him with everything, and now I have nothing. The final blow came from Harold, who presented evidence of the Phoenix Trust and Grandma Rose's documentation of the family's crimes. Rose Brennan spent the last decade of her life gathering evidence and protecting her granddaughter, he stated. She knew what this family was capable of and took extraordinary measures to ensure Dusty would survive their greed. As the hearing concluded, Judge Thornton denied bail for all three defendants. The evidence presented shows a clear and present danger to Ms. Brennan and potentially other victims. The defendants will remain in custody pending trial. As they were led away, Marcus turned to me one last time. His expression was no longer angry or arrogant. It was blank empty, like something vital had been extracted. "You won," he said flatly. "Are you happy now?" "No," I replied honestly. "There's nothing happy about discovering your family wanted you dead, but I am free." Richard didn't look at me at all, his shoulders slumped in defeat, but Janet paused, her eyes meeting mine for the first time in weeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know it doesn't matter, but I'm sorry." Whether she meant it or was just angling for leniency, I'd never know, and frankly, I didn't care. Apologies couldn't undo decades of abuse or erase the conspiracy to murder me. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy was overwhelming. Diana gave a brief statement about justice being served while we escaped through a side entrance. In the car surrounded by the family I'd found, rather than the one I'd been born into, I finally allowed myself to cry. "It's over," Margaret said softly, holding me as I sobbed. "The worst part is over." But she was wrong. The hearing was just the beginning. The trial itself would be months away, and there were still so many victims to help, so much damage to undo. Marcus might be in custody, but his words echoed, "You won." Had I. My health was compromised from years of untreated kidney disease. My ability to trust was shattered. My entire childhood had been revealed as a lie built on criminal foundations. But I was alive. I had resources to help others. I had people who actually loved me. If that was winning, it was the kind of victory that came with a body count and scars that would never fully heal. But it was still better than the alternative. Being another victim of the Brennan family's greed disappeared like Miguel Reyes and the others who'd stood in their way. As we drove home, I thought about Dorothy Patterson and the other elderly victims Marcus had defrauded. Tomorrow, I'd meet with Harold about setting up a restitution fund from my inheritance. Grandma Rose would have approved, using the wealth she'd protected to help others recover from my family's crimes. The Brennan family empire had fallen in the most public way possible. Tomorrow, the headlines would scream about family betrayal and attempted murder. My name would be forever linked to one of the most shocking criminal cases in the state. But I was still standing, scarred, exhausted, forever changed, but standing. And sometimes that's what winning looks like. 2 days after the hearing, I stood in the basement of 47 Maple Street with FBI agents, a structural engineer, and a documentary crew that Diana had approved to record the investigation. What started as a routine evidence sweep had turned into something far more disturbing. There's definitely a hidden room behind this wall, the engineer Carl Morrison confirmed after running his equipment along the foundation. The measurements don't match up. You're missing about 12 feet of space. I remembered this basement from childhood. Richard's forbidden domain where I was never allowed to play. He'd claimed it was dangerous, full of construction equipment and chemicals. Now I understood the real reason. As they carefully demolished a section of false wall, my phone buzzed with a text from Harold. Janet's lawyer just called. She wants to make a full confession in exchange for a plea deal. Can you come to the office? Manainsae. I looked at Agent Torres, who nodded. Go. We'll document everything here and brief you later. At Harold's office, I found Diana Castellanos looking grimly satisfied. Janet scared. Other inmates found out she was planning to kill her daughter for money. Apparently, even hardened criminals have standards. She's ready to tell us everything. The confession took place in a sterile room at the county jail. Janet sat across from us, looking decades older than her 63 years. Her lawyer, Sylvia Chen, sat beside her with a digital recorder. Start from the beginning, Diana instructed. And remember, any lies or omissions void this deal. Janet's story began 30 years ago when she discovered she was pregnant with Thomas Hartwell's child. I panicked. Thomas made it clear our affair was just fun, nothing serious. His wife had family money, political connections. He couldn't leave her. So you trapped Richard, I stated flatly. She flinched but nodded. Richard had been pursuing me for months. He came from a decent family, had a small inheritance. I seduced him, made him think the baby was his. We married quickly, and when you were born, premature, he never questioned it. When did he find out the truth? When you were 5. You needed blood during a surgery for appendicitis. Richard was type O, I'm type A, but you're type AB. He knew immediately that was impossible. Janet's voice cracked. He confronted me that night. I thought he'd leave us, but instead, he saw an opportunity. Blackmail, Diana said. He contacted Thomas, demanded money for silence. Thomas paid for a few years, then cut us off when you started school. Said any scandal would be old news by then. Janet twisted her hands. Richard was furious. He'd gotten used to the extra income. That's when the hatred really started. He hated me because I wasn't his biological daughter. He hated you because you were evidence of my betrayal and a lost income stream. Every time he looked at you, he saw dollar signs that had dried up. Janet's tears seemed genuine for once. I should have left him, then taken you away. But I was comfortable, and when Marcus was born, he was the real son, I finished. Richard poured everything into Marcus, private schools, tutors, opportunities. I went along with it because it was easier than fighting, and honestly, part of me resented you too. You reminded me of my mistakes, of Thomas, of the life I could have had. The confession continued for 3 hours. Janet detailed every crime, every scheme, every moment when she chose greed over her daughter's well-being. She confirmed that Richard had ordered the hits on construction workers who threatened to expose his money laundering. She revealed that Marcus had been stealing from elderly clients for 5 years, not 3. Most chillingly, she admitted they'd been planning my death since I turned 25. Rose started getting suspicious about the trust funds. We knew she'd probably leave everything to you. The original plan was to have you declared mentally incompetent, but Rose was too sharp. She'd have fought it. So Marcus suggested, Murder, I said when she couldn't continue. He made it sound so simple. An accident, an overdose, something that wouldn't raise questions. Richard had connections through the Torinos. They could make it happen. She looked at me with empty eyes. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know what we did is unforgivable. I want you to know that somewhere deep down part of me was relieved when you exposed us. The guilt was eating me alive. Diana exchanged glances with Sylvia Chen. Mrs. Brennan, we need to know about the basement room, the one Richard kept locked. Janet went pale. I don't know anything about. Any lies void this deal, Diana reminded her sharply. Janet crumpled. Richard called it his insurance policy. He has files on everyone, judges, police officials, city councilors, photographs, recordings, evidence of affairs and bribes and crimes. He's been collecting blackmail material for 20 years. My phone rang. Agent Torres. You need to see this, she said without preamble. Back at the house, the hidden room was fully exposed. It was larger than my childhood bedroom, lined with filing cabinets and safety deposit boxes. A desk held multiple computers and recording equipment. The walls were covered with photographs and documents. A conspiracy theorist's dream, except it was all real. This is... Agent Torres trailed off, staring at a board labeled Leverage. Photos of a prominent judge leaving a hotel with someone who wasn't his wife. Financial records showing a police captain taking bribes. Medical records proving a senator had covered up a drunk driving incident that killed a pedestrian. The web of corruption extended far beyond my family. He was protecting the money laundering operation, I realized. If anyone got too close, he had ammunition to make them back off. We'll need a federal task force for this, Agent Torres muttered, photographing everything. This is going to take down half the city's power structure. But the worst discovery was in a locked file cabinet labeled Dusty Contingency Plans. Inside were dozens of scenarios for my death, each meticulously planned. Car accidents, home invasions, poisonings, even a detailed plan to push me in front of a subway train. The earliest dated back to when I was 16. He's been planning to kill me for 12 years, I said numbly. Look at this, one of the agents called out. He'd found another folder labeled Rose Neutralized. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were medical records from Grandma Rose's final hospital stay, but they'd been altered. The originals showed she'd been improving, likely to recover. The forgeries showed rapid decline. I couldn't finish the question. Agent Torres's expression was grim. We'll need to exhume her body for toxicology, but based on this, it's possible your grandmother was murdered. The room spun. I'd thought Grandma Rose had died naturally, peacefully. The idea that they might have killed her to get to her money to get to me? I need air. I managed stumbling outside. Margaret was waiting by the car. She and Thomas had refused to let me come alone. She took one look at my face and wrapped me in her arms. They might have killed her, I sobbed. Grandma Rose. They might have murdered her too. Oh, sweetheart! Margaret held me tighter. I'm so sorry, so sorry. The investigation continued for hours. They found more evidence of the construction worker murders, including personal items Richard had kept as trophies. Miguel Reyes's wallet was in a drawer along with his wedding ring. 3 other missing workers' IDs were filed neatly in a folder marked Resolved Problems. By evening, the FBI had transported 17 boxes of evidence from the hidden room. The U.S. Attorney's Office was already preparing additional charges, and several prominent city officials were about to have their worlds destroyed. But the day's revelations weren't over. As we prepared to leave, Stephanie arrived with her parents and a manila envelope. I'm sorry to intrude, she said, but I found something else, hidden in Marcus's old college textbooks. Inside the envelope were photographs that made everyone freeze. They showed Marcus and Richard at what appeared to be a Torino family gathering. But Marcus wasn't just there as a guest. He was clearly part of the inner circle, laughing with known mob enforcers, his arm around the daughter of a capo. Turn it over, Stephanie instructed. On the back in Marcus's handwriting, officially in, Dad doesn't know yet. This is my operation now. He wasn't just laundering money for them, Agent Torres said slowly. He was trying to take over the operation, push Richard out and run it himself. More pieces clicked into place. Marcus's confidence, his protection from the Torinos, even after stealing from them. He'd been playing all sides. The golden boy had ambitions that went far beyond inheriting a construction company. There's one more thing, Stephanie said quietly. I had a DNA test done for the baby. I needed to know. She handed me the results. Marcus isn't the father. The father was listed as Anthony Torino, the eldest son of the crime family. Well, Marcus was setting me up, she whispered, getting me pregnant by Anthony, then claiming the baby as his. He was going to use my child as leverage to cement his position in the family. Even for Marcus, this level of manipulation was staggering. He'd used everyone, his parents, me, Stephanie, even the mob, as pieces in his twisted game for power. As we left Maple Street, for what I hoped would be the last time I thought about the hidden room and all its secrets. Richard had built a fortress of blackmail and murder to protect his crimes. Marcus had tried to build an empire on the foundation of our family's corruption. Janet had enabled it all for comfort and security. And Grandma Rose. She'd built something else entirely. A wall of protection around me, funded by honest investments and documented with meticulous care. She'd known what they were and had spent her final years ensuring I'd survive them. The news would break tomorrow. The hidden room, the murder evidence, the connections to organized crime, the possibility that Rose had been murdered. It would all become public. The earthquake of my family's crimes would have aftershocks throughout the city. Are you okay? Thomas asked as we drove away. No, I answered honestly. But I will be. Grandma Rose made sure of that. In my apartment that night, I opened the jewelry box containing her wedding ring, the one Stephanie had returned. Inside the band was an inscription I'd never noticed before: "Truth survives all storms." Somehow she'd known that one day the truth would come out, the storms would rage, but I would survive. The family secrets were unraveling like a poison-soaked tapestry, each thread revealing new horrors. But with each revelation, the power they'd held over me diminished. They could take no more from me. There was nothing left to steal, no trust left to betray. Only truth remained, and truth, as Grandma Rose knew, was the one thing they could never corrupt. The federal prison visiting room smelled like industrial disinfectant and despair. 8 months had passed since the arrests, 5 since the trials began. Richard and Janet had been sentenced. Richard to 35 years for murder, money laundering, and racketeering. Janet to 15 years after her cooperation reduced her charges. But Marcus's trial was still ongoing, his self-representation turning it into a circus that made national news. Today was the first time I'd agreed to see them since the initial hearing. My kidney transplant, successful thanks to Thomas being a perfect match, had given me a new lease on life. The therapy had helped me process the trauma, but Diana had called yesterday with news that made this visit necessary. Marcus finally broke, she'd told me. He wants to confess everything, but only to you. His lawyer, yes, he finally hired one, thinks it might help with sentencing. Now I sat across from my former family, bulletproof glass between us. Thomas and Margaret waited outside, ready to support me when this was over. The security cameras recorded everything, and Diana observed from another room. Richard entered first, shuffling in leg irons. Prison had not been kind to him. The man who terrorized construction workers and commanded respect through fear was now a hollow shell. His orange jumpsuit hung loose on his diminished frame. He sat down heavily, picking up the phone. For a moment, we just stared at each other. "You look well," he finally said. "The surgery went okay." "No thanks to you," I replied. "You knew I was sick and hid it. You were going to let me die." His jaw clenched. "That was Janet's idea. He stopped shaking his head. No, I'm done lying. It was me, too. We figured if you died naturally, we'd inherit without suspicion. How long were you planning to kill me? Richard's laugh was bitter. Honestly, since the day I found out you weren't mine, every time I looked at you, I saw Janet's betrayal. I saw the money Thomas stopped sending. I saw everything wrong with my life. So you decided to murder a child? Not then. Not directly. I just ignored you, hoped you'd disappear. But you kept succeeding, kept achieving things Marcus couldn't. You made him look weak, and that threatened everything I'd built for him. He leaned forward. Do you know what it's like to raise another man's child? To pretend to be a father when every cell in your body screams that it's wrong? Do you know what it's like to be that child? I countered. To know something's wrong but not understand why your father hates you. To work yourself to exhaustion trying to earn love that was never available. I gave you shelter, food, the basics. You gave me survival while giving Marcus life. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. Yeah, there is. For what it's worth, and I know it's worth nothing. Part of me admired your strength. You reminded me of Rose, tough, determined, too smart for your own good. Is that why you killed her? The question hung between us like a blade. Richard's face went through several expressions before settling on resignation. Marcus did that. I didn't know until after. He put something in her IV during a hospital visit. Made it look like natural organ failure. He met my eyes. I would have stopped him if I'd known. She was the only one in that family worth respecting. But you didn't stop him from planning my murder. No. By then I was in too deep. The Torinos, the FBI, closing in the money gone. You were the solution to everything. Your death would have funded our escape. He laughed bitterly. Joke's on us. You had millions we didn't even know about. The guard signaled 5 minutes remaining. Richard straightened slightly. I'm gonna die in here, he said matter-of-factly. The Torinos have a long reach, and I failed them. The Aryans want me dead for working with Italians. The blacks and Hispanics hate me for what I did to their people in construction. I've got maybe a year if I'm lucky. Are you asking for my forgiveness? No, I'm not that delusional. I just wanted you to know that in the end you won completely. Everything I built is ash. Everyone I tried to protect is destroyed, and you're thriving. His smile was twisted. Rose would be cackling. He hung up the phone and shuffled out without looking back. Janet entered next, and the change was even more dramatic. The perfectly coiffed suburban mother was gone, replaced by a gray-haired woman who looked every one of her 64 years. She grabbed the phone eagerly. See, oh God, you look wonderful, healthy, happy. I've been praying. Stop. I cut her off. We have 15 minutes. Say what you need to say. Her face crumpled, but she nodded. I've had a lot of time to think, to remember. Do you know what my biggest regret is? I waited. The day you took your first steps, you toddled right to me, arms out, smile so bright, and I stepped back. I let you fall because Richard was watching, and I didn't want him to see me love you. Tears streamed down her face. That's who I was, a mother who chose comfort over her child. You chose Marcus over me every single day. I chose Richard's money over both of you, she corrected. Marcus is as much a victim as you in his way. We created a monster by giving him everything except boundaries and consequences. Marcus stalked me for over a decade. He murdered Grandma Rose. He's a victim of nothing but his own choices. Janet flinched. You're right. I know you're right, but I'm his mother. Even now, knowing what he is, part of me loves him. Just like part of me always loved you, even when I was too poisoned by greed to show it. Love without action is just a pretty word, I said, quoting Grandma Rose. She told me that once, Janet whispered, at your high school graduation. Said I'd regret choosing money over my daughter. Said karma had a long memory and a patient hand. She was right about everything. She was. Janet straightened slightly. I've been going to therapy here. The prison psychologist says I have narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features. Says it probably started in childhood but was enabled by marrying Richard. I'm not using it as an excuse, just trying to understand how I became someone who could plan her daughter's murder. Does understanding help? No. Nothing helps except knowing you survived us, that you found real parents who love you, that you're building something good from all our poison. She pressed her palm against the glass. I know I have no right to ask, but will you let me know when you have children? Just a card once a year, so I can know the cycle broke. I stared at her hand on the glass, remembering all the times those hands had pushed me away. I'll think about it. It was more than she deserved, but less than she hoped for. She nodded, understanding. But Marcus is going to tell you things, she warned as our time ran out. Things about Thomas, about the past. Don't let him poison you against your real family. He's desperate and dangerous. Then she was gone, and Marcus was being brought in. My brother looked like a caged predator. Where prison had diminished our parents, it had honed Marcus into something sharp and feral. His eyes glittered with manic energy as he grabbed the phone. Hello, sister dear. Love what you've done with your hair. I survived attempted murder and got a makeover. You wanted to confess. So confess? His smile was all teeth. Straight to business. You really have gotten harder. Good. You'll need it for what I'm about to tell you. He leaned forward conspiracially. Did you know our precious bio-dad Thomas isn't the saint he pretends to be? I know he had an affair with a student. Ancient history. Oh, no, much better than that. Marcus's grin widened. He's been in the Torino's pocket for 20 years. How do you think he really afforded all those Senate campaigns? Your daddy's as dirty as the rest of us. I kept my expression neutral despite my racing heart. Prove it. Check his voting record on construction contracts. Check who got the big state projects. Check whose cases got mysteriously dropped by prosecutors he recommended. Marcus was almost gleeful. He's been feeding them information and contracts worth millions. You traded one criminal family for another. You're lying. I ask him about the Riverside Development Project. Ask about Miguel Reyes. My blood froze. What about Miguel? Your precious father knew we were going to kill him. Torino asked permission because Miguel's cousin worked for Thomas, didn't want to cause political problems. Marcus's eyes glittered with malice. Thomas said, and I quote, handle it quietly. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the phone harder, forcing myself to breathe. Even if that's true, I managed. It doesn't excuse what you did. No, but it should open your eyes. We're all killers, Dusty. Some of us are just better at hiding it. He leaned back. But you wanted my confession, so here it is. Yes, I killed Grandma Rose. Potassium chloride in her IV. She was going to expose everything had to be stopped. She was 93 years old. She was a threat, just like you were a threat, just like anyone who challenges the natural order is a threat. His mask finally slipped, showing the rage beneath. You were supposed to be weak, supposed to fail. Instead, you kept exceeding, kept achieving, kept making me look inadequate. You know what it's like to be the golden child, but know your reject sister is actually better. So you decided to kill me. I decided to correct nature's mistake. You should never have been born. Mom's pregnancy ruined everything. Dad's plans, our family's reputation, my future. You were a living reminder of her betrayal and his weakness. He was breathing hard now, years of resentment pouring out. Every award you won, every time someone praised you, it was theft, stealing attention and resources that belonged to me. It wasn't a competition, Marcus. I just wanted to be loved. Everything is a competition. Life is about winning and losing. I was supposed to win. He slammed his fist on the counter. I did everything right. Perfect son, perfect student, perfect employee. But somehow you, working your pathetic jobs, living in that pathetic apartment, you ended up with everything. Because Grandma Rose saw what you really were. She was senile, confused. If she'd been thinking clearly, she would have left it all to me. She was thinking clearly enough to document every crime plan for every contingency and ensure I'd survive your attempts to kill me. Marcus's face contorted. I should have killed you years ago, that night when you were 16 sleeping so peacefully. I stood over your bed with a pillow for 20 minutes, imagining how easy it would be. But I was weak then, sentimental. The casual admission of almost murdering me as a teenager should have shocked me. Instead, I felt only sad validation. Some part of me had always known he was dangerous. Are we done here? I asked. You've confessed to murder and conspiracy. What else is there? Just this. Marcus leaned forward one last time. I'm getting out. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but eventually. And when I do, I'm going to finish what I started. You can surround yourself with security, change your name, move to another country. Doesn't matter. I'll find you, because you're my unfinished business and I always complete what I start. Marcus Brennan stepped back from the window. A guard commanded, "Visit's over." As they led him away, he turned back one more time. "Check on Biodad, sis. Ask him about Miguel. Ask him about the blood on his hands. You'll see we're all the same in the end." I sat in the visiting room for several minutes after he left processing everything. Then I walked out to where Thomas and Margaret waited, their faces full of concern. "How did it go?" Margaret asked gently. I looked at Thomas, studying his face. "Marcus made some accusations about you and the Torinos, about Miguel Reyes." Thomas's face went pale, but he met my eyes. "We should talk. Not here. Somewhere private." The drive home was silent. In my apartment, now a penthouse bought with Grandma Rose's money secured like a fortress, we sat in my living room overlooking the city. "Is it true?" I asked simply. "Are you connected to the Torinos?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then, "It's complicated." "Then uncomplicated." He sighed deeply. 20 years ago, when I first ran for Senate, I needed funding. Clean funding was hard to come by for someone without family wealth. The Torinos approached me through intermediaries. Nothing illegal, just campaign contributions through legitimate businesses. In exchange, they wanted consideration on certain contracts. And Miguel Reyes, pain flashed across his face. I didn't know they would kill him. Daniel Torino called, said there was a problem with a worker threatening to expose some safety violations. Asked if it would cause me political problems if the worker went away. I thought he meant fired or paid off. I said to handle it quietly. His voice broke. "I swear to God, Dusty, I didn't know they meant murder. When Miguel disappeared and I realized, I've lived with that guilt every day since." "But you didn't report it." "No," he admitted. "I was a coward, afraid of losing everything. I told myself I couldn't help Miguel by destroying my career, that I could do more good in office. Classic political rationalization." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Behind me, Margaret spoke softly. "He's tried to atone. Every safety law he's passed, every worker protection bill, it's all been trying to save others because he couldn't save Miguel." "Does that make it right?" "No," Thomas said firmly. "Nothing makes it right. Just like nothing makes what I did to you and your mother right. I was young, selfish, ambitious. I chose my career over my responsibilities, and people paid for my choices. Everyone in my life is compromised," I said to my reflection in the window. "Everyone has blood on their hands." "Yes," Thomas agreed quietly. "The question is what we do with that truth." I turned to face them. "Marcus wants me to reject you, to be alone again. That's why he told me. Another manipulation, another attempt to isolate me." "What do you want?" Margaret asked. I thought about Grandma Rose, who'd known about everyone's sins but chose to focus on protecting me anyway. I thought about second chances and redemption, about breaking cycles and building something better. "I want the truth," I said finally. "All of it. No more secrets, no more surprises. And I want us to use our resources to help the families of everyone our collective sins have hurt, starting with Miguel's daughters." Thomas nodded, tears in his eyes. Whatever you want, whatever it takes. And Marcus, Margaret asked, his threat is real, I acknowledged. He'll try to kill me if he ever gets out, but I won't live in fear. Grandma Rose didn't spend decades planning just so I could hide. That night after they left, I stood on my balcony thinking about the day's revelations. My biological father was flawed, compromised by choices made in ambition. But he'd searched for me, donated a kidney to save my life, and was trying to make amends. Richard would die in prison, abandoned by everyone he'd tried to impress. Janet would serve her time hoping for a single yearly card about grandchildren she'd never meet. Marcus would rot in his cage, feeding on hatred and plans for revenge. And me, I had work to do. The Phoenix Trust Grandma Rose had protected would fund scholarships for children like I'd been, overlooked, undervalued, but full of potential. The victims of my family's crimes would be compensated. Miguel's daughters would get the education their father had died trying to provide. It wasn't perfect. There was too much blood, too much pain for perfect, but it was progress. It was choosing to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than perpetuate harm. As I prepared for bed, I found myself at the jewelry box containing Grandma Rose's ring. Tomorrow, I decided I'd have it resized to fit, not as a reminder of the past, but as a promise for the future. The confrontation with my former family was over. They'd had their say, made their confessions, issued their threats. Now it was time to stop looking back at the ashes and start building something new. Something worthy of the woman who'd saved me before I even knew I needed saving. Something that would ensure no child ever went through what I had. Something that would make even the strongest Phoenix proud. The storage unit hadn't been opened in 30 years. Located in an industrial district 40 minutes outside the city, it was registered under Rose Martha Williams, Grandma Rose's maiden name. The key had been in the Phoenix Trust safety deposit box, along with a simple note for Dusty when she's ready to know everything. I stood before the rusted door with bolt cutters, Thomas and Margaret beside me, Harold and Agent Torres behind them. We debated coming alone, but after Marcus's threats and the revelation of deeper family secrets, everyone insisted on security. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Margaret asked gently. "Some secrets might be better left buried." "No," I said firmly, cutting through the old lock. "Grandma Rose wanted me to find this. She wouldn't have kept it if it wasn't important." The door rolled up with a metallic shriek, revealing a 10 by 20 space packed with file boxes, old furniture, and what looked like photography equipment. The musty smell of old paper and forgotten memories filled the air. "Good God," Harold breathed, flashlight beam dancing across labels on boxes. "These go back to the 50s. Agent Torres was already photographing everything. "This is organized chronologically. Your grandmother was building an archive." The first box was labeled 1952-1960, the beginning. Inside were photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings. A young Rose, beautiful and fierce, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. Marriage certificates, birth certificates, and then death certificates. "Rose was married before," Thomas said, studying a photograph. "This man, William Collins. They had a son named James." I found the newspaper clipping, "Local business owner and son killed in suspicious fire." The date was 3 years before Mom was born. "She lost her first family," Margaret whispered. "Oh, Rose." The next box revealed the truth. Police reports, insurance documents, and Rose's own handwritten notes. William had been in business with a young Richard Brennan Sr., my grandfather. When William discovered Richard was embezzling, he'd threatened to go to the police. The fire that killed William and James was officially ruled accidental, but Rose's notes painted a different picture. "She knew," I said, reading her careful script. "She knew Richard Sr. killed them but couldn't prove it, so she got close to the enemy instead." "She married her family's killer." Thomas sounded horrified. "To get evidence." Agent Torres corrected, finding more documents. Look at this. She spent 20 years documenting every crime Richard Sr. committed. Business fraud, extortion, connections to early organized crime. She was building a case. The boxes revealed a story more twisted than any of us had imagined. Rose had married Richard Sr. not for love, but for justice. She'd had Janet playing the perfect wife while secretly documenting every illegal activity. She'd gathered enough evidence to destroy him, but never used it. Why didn't she turn him in? I asked, frustrated. Harold found the answer in a letter Rose never sent. By the time I had enough proof, Janet was 10 years old. How could I destroy her father, even knowing what he was? I chose to protect my daughter over avenging my son. God forgive me. The middle boxes documented Janet's childhood and Richard Sr.'s death from a heart attack when she was 18. Rose had finally been free, but the damage was done. Janet had learned her father's lessons too well. That money mattered more than morals, that the weak existed to serve the strong. This explained so much, Margaret said sadly. Janet grew up watching her father's crimes go unpunished, thinking that was normal. But the most shocking revelations were in the newer boxes. Rose had discovered Janet's affair with Thomas before I was even born. There were photographs of them together, records of the blackmail payments, and something else. Medical records showing Janet had been pregnant once before in college. She had another child. I stared at the termination paperwork. A year before me. Thomas went white. That would have been mine too. She never told me. Because she wasn't sure she could trap you with it yet, Agent Torres said, reading Rose's notes. According to this, Janet had multiple affairs going at trying to find the right target for her long-term plans. You were the richest, so when she got pregnant again, she kept me. I finished feeling sick. The boxes from my childhood were the hardest to review. Rose had documented every instance of abuse, every favoritism shown to Marcus, every crime Richard and Janet committed. There were photographs of bruises I didn't remember, recordings of conversations where they discussed their hatred of me, evidence of their early financial crimes. She was building a case to take custody, Harold realized, but the courts in the 80s rarely removed children from wealthy, intact families. So she pivoted to protecting me financially instead. I said finding documents for the Phoenix Trust. If she couldn't save me physically, she'd ensure I'd survive financially. One box was dedicated entirely to Marcus. The contents made everyone uncomfortable. Psychological evaluations. Rose had somehow obtained reports from teachers expressing concern about his lack of empathy, incidents with animals and smaller children that had been covered up. She knew he was dangerous from childhood, Thomas said quietly. These reports, they're textbook indicators of antisocial personality disorder. Richard and Janet knew too. Agent Torres added finding receipts. They paid off multiple families whose children Marcus had hurt, bought silence instead of getting him help. The final boxes were the most recent, documenting the build-up to current events. Rose had known about the murder plot for at least 2 years before her death. She'd recorded conversations, hired private investigators, even installed her own cameras in the house before suggesting I do the same. She was 3 steps ahead the entire time. I marveled, finding detailed plans. Every suggestion she made to me was part of a larger strategy, including pushing us to investigate, Margaret realized. She knew we were looking for you. Some of these documents were left where our investigator would find them. At the back of the storage unit, wrapped in plastic, was an old film projector and several reels. The labels made my blood run cold. William and James, Last Christmas, and Evidence Original. We need to watch these, Agent Torres said. This could be evidence in cold cases. Back at the FBI office, we gathered in a viewing room as technicians set up the old equipment. The first reel showed a happy family. William Collins was handsome and kind-looking, playing with a boy who looked remarkably like I did at that age. Rose was radiant, clearly in love. Watching her first family, knowing their fate was heartbreaking. The second reel was different. Grainy shot from a distance, it showed Richard Sr. meeting with known arsonists 2 days before the fire. The audio was poor but audible enough to hear him saying, "Make it look electrical. The wife needs to be elsewhere." "This is evidence of murder conspiracy," SA Agent Torres said. "Even though Richard Sr. is dead, this could help solve other cold cases from that era." We found more reels, more evidence. Rose had spent 70 years documenting 3 generations of crime. She'd lost her first family to murder, raised a daughter who became a criminal, watched her granddaughter be abused, and her grandson become a monster. Through it all, she'd maintained her facade while building an archive that would eventually bring justice. "How did she stand it?" I asked, overwhelmed. "Living with them, knowing what they were—" "For you," Thomas said simply, "everything in these later boxes is about protecting you. She couldn't save her son, couldn't save Janet from becoming what she became, but she could save you." The last item in the storage unit was a locked chest. Inside were photo albums I'd never seen, pictures of Rose with her first family mementos from her son James, and at the bottom 2 letters, one addressed to me, one to James. I opened mine with trembling hands. "My dearest Dusty, if you're reading this, then you've discovered the full truth about our family's darkness. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I lived. It would have put you in more danger. But you deserve to know why I did what I did. When I lost William and James, I lost myself. The woman who married Richard Sr. wasn't me. She was a creature of vengeance wearing my face. By the time I remembered who I really was, I had Janet, and the cycle was already repeating. I failed to save your mother from becoming what she is. I failed to prevent Marcus from being born broken. But you were my redemption. In you, I saw James's kindness, William's strength, and somehow, despite everything, my own hope reborn. Every document in this storage unit represents a choice to gather evidence instead of fleeing to stay in hell to protect heaven. You were my heaven sweetheart. You are the good that came from so much evil. Use what you find here wisely. Some secrets need revealing, others might only cause more pain. Trust your judgment. It's better than mine ever was. Remember, you are not defined by the crimes of those who came before. You are defined by the love that survived despite them. All my love, Grandma Rose. The letter to James was shorter, an apology to a son who never got to grow up, promising that his death would eventually have meaning through the sister he'd never meet. As we left the storage facility, each carrying boxes of evidence that would rewrite decades of history, I felt the weight of Rose's legacy. 3 generations of crime documented by one woman's patient hand. Murders, theft, abuse, and corruption, spanning 70 years, all carefully cataloged and preserved. "What do we do with all this?" I asked Agent Torres. "We investigate every crime that isn't past the statute of limitations. We inform victims' families. We rewrite the official record." She paused. "Your grandmother built us a roadmap to justice. We'd be negligent not to follow it." That night in my secured apartment, I sat surrounded by photographs of 2 families, the one Rose lost and the one she couldn't save. In every picture, her eyes held the same fierce determination that I'd inherited. Marcus had been wrong. We weren't all the same. Yes, Thomas had made moral compromises. Yes, every family had shadows, but there were those who chose to perpetuate cycles of harm and those who chose to break them. Grandma Rose had spent 70 years playing the longest game imaginable, gathering evidence and protecting the innocent while surrounded by evil. She'd lost her son, but saved her granddaughter. She'd married a murderer to document his crimes. She'd built financial empires while pretending to be a simple housewife. All for me, all to ensure that someday, somehow, justice would prevail and I would survive. The family secrets weren't fully unraveled. There were still boxes to review, evidence to process, cold cases to solve. But the core truth was clear. In a family built on crime, Rose had been the underground resistance. and I was her victory. Tomorrow, we'd begin the process of using her evidence to bring closure to decades-old cases. Miguel Reyes's family would learn what really happened to him. Other victims would finally have answers. But tonight, I held Rose's ring and made her a promise. The archive she'd built wouldn't just bring justice for the past. It would fund programs to prevent future victims. The Phoenix Trust would become the Rose Collins Foundation, named for the woman she'd been before tragedy transformed her. Every document in that storage unit represented a choice to stay and fight rather than flee. Now it was my turn to choose. I chose to honor her sacrifice by building something worthy of it. The secrets were unraveled, the truth revealed. Now came the harder task, building something beautiful from the ashes of so much destruction. Grandma Rose had given me the tools. It was time to use them. 10 months later, I walked through the federal prison gates one last time. But this visit was different. I wasn't coming as a victim seeking closure or a daughter confronting her would-be killers. I was coming as an executor of justice with news that would shatter their last hopes. The meeting was arranged in a conference room rather than the visiting area. Diana Castellanos was there along with Harold, 2 federal marshals, and a court reporter. All 3 members of my former family would hear this together. They were brought in separately. Richard in a wheelchair, now his health failing rapidly as he'd predicted. Janet looking somehow smaller as if prison had physically diminished her. And Marcus in full shackles, his self-representation, having resulted in 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. "Why are we here?" Richard wheezed, his voice a shadow of its former authority. "To inform you of recent developments regarding the various criminal and civil cases stemming from your activities," Diana said formally. "Ms. Brennan has requested to deliver this information personally." I stood holding a thick folder. "Let me start with you, Richard. The Torino crime family has decided to forgive your debt posthumously. They've been impressed by my efforts to compensate their legitimate business losses from your theft. In exchange, they've provided evidence about 16 murders you ordered through them, including Miguel Reyes and 3 other construction workers." Richard's face went gray. "That's impossible. They don't break omerta." "They do when someone offers them a better deal," I said simply. "I've hired their legitimate construction companies for several Phoenix Trust development projects. Turns out they prefer honest money to blood money. Who knew?" "You made a deal with the mob," Janet gasped. "I made a deal with businessmen who want to go legitimate. Unlike you, I don't need crime to succeed." I pulled out the next document. "Janet, your sister Patricia has been located. Remember her, the one whose inheritance you stole 20 years ago. She's agreed to testify in the civil suit. She's also identified 6 other relatives you and Richard defrauded." "Patricia's dead," Janet insisted. "She died in Mexico." "No, she's very much alive in California, where you sent those forged death certificates to steal her trust fund." I showed her a photograph of Patricia at the recent family reunion I'd organized for all of Richard and Janet's victims. "She's thriving, by the way. The Phoenix Trust restored everything you stole with interest." Marcus laughed harsh and bitter. "How noble! St. Dusty saving everyone with Grandma's money. You think that makes you better than us?" "No," I said, turning to him. "What makes me better is that I'm not a murderer. Speaking of which, your final appeal was denied yesterday, but that's not why you're here. I wanted to tell you personally that Stephanie had the baby. A healthy girl." His face transformed with something like hope. "A daughter! What's her name? When can I—" "You'll never see her." I cut him off. "Stephanie signed away your parental rights. Thomas and I testified at the hearing about your long-term stalking and violent tendencies. The judge agreed you pose a permanent threat to any child." "You can't do that." Marcus lunged forward, held back by his shackles and the marshals. "She's my daughter, my blood." "Actually," I said, pulling out the final document, "she's not. Remember how you were setting Stephanie up with Anthony Torino? The DNA test confirmed he's the father. You were so busy playing puppet master, you didn't realize she'd already moved on from you. The sound Marcus made wasn't quite human. It was rage and despair and the final shattering of his self-image. He'd lost everything. His freedom, his money, his power, and now even the child he'd thought would carry on his legacy. But here's the part you'll really hate, I continued. Anthony Torino has signed away his rights too. He wants nothing to do with a child conceived through your manipulations. So Stephanie's parents adopted her, and guess who they asked to be a godmother? Understanding dawned in his eyes. No. Yes, I'm helping raise the daughter you'll never meet. She'll grow up knowing her biological father was a monster, but surrounded by people who actually love her. She'll hear stories about Grandma Rose and learn to spot manipulation before it takes root. She'll be everything you never were. Kind, honest, genuinely successful. I'll kill you for this, Marcus snarled. Somehow, someday. No, you won't, Diana interrupted. That's the other reason we're here. Based on the threats you've made and the evidence of your previous murder conspiracies, you're being transferred to ADX Florence. Solitary confinement for the rest of your natural life. No contact with the outside world. No possibility of coordinating violence against Ms. Brennan or anyone else. ADX Florence. The Alcatraz of the Rockies, where the worst terrorists and killers spent 23 hours a day in concrete cells. Marcus's face went white as the implications hit him. You can't. That's for terrorists. I'm not. You conspired to murder your sister for financial gain, Diana said coldly. You stalked her for over a decade. You murdered your grandmother. You've made credible threats against Miss Brennan even from prison. ADX Florence is exactly where you belong. Richard surprised me by laughing. A wet, dying sound. She played you boy, played all of us, just like Rose did. He looked at me with something almost like respect. You're her granddaughter through and through. I learned from the best, I agreed. But unlike her, I didn't have to spend 70 years gathering evidence. You all did most of the work for me, with your arrogance and greed. What happens to the house? Janet asked suddenly. Our house. My house, I corrected, which has been demolished. The land is being turned into the Rose Collins Memorial Garden, a public space for the community you terrorized for decades. Miguel Reyes's daughters are designing it as part of their landscape architecture studies. You demolished it? Janet's tears were genuine now. All our memories. We're poisoned by your crimes, but don't worry, I saved one thing. I pulled out a small box, opening it to reveal a brick. This is from the foundation. I'm having it installed in the memorial with a plaque, Here Lies the Brennan Legacy. A foundation built on crime demolished by justice. Poetic, Richard wheezed. Rose would approve. There's more, I continued. The storage unit full of evidence Rose compiled. We've processed everything. 17 cold cases have been solved. 43 families have gotten answers about missing relatives. 3 corrupt judges have been removed from the bench. A whole network of financial criminals has been exposed. She documented everything, Janet whispered. Everything, including your father's murder of her first family. Did you know you had a half-brother who died at age 6? That your mother married your father specifically to gather evidence about his crimes? The revelation hit Janet like a physical blow. That's not possible. My parents loved each other. Your mother loved her murdered son and husband. Your father was just a means to an end. Justice she never quite achieved but passed down to me instead. Harold stepped forward. There's also the matter of restitution. The civil suits have been consolidated. Between the 3 of you, you owe approximately $18 million to various victims. Since your assets total less than $2 million, the Phoenix Trust will cover the difference with liens against any future earnings. What future earnings? Marcus spat. Will die in prison. Richard might. I agreed, looking at his deteriorating condition. But you and Janet have decades left. 23 cents an hour in the prison workshop. Should only take about 3,000 years to pay it back. Why? Janet asked, genuine confusion in her voice. You've won! We're destroyed. Why come here to rub it in? I considered the question. Because for 28 years you made me feel worthless. You plotted my death while smiling at family dinners. You stole my childhood, my trust, my health. So yes, I wanted you to know exactly how completely you failed. I wanted you to understand that every crime you committed led directly to your destruction. And Richard prompted, recognizing there was more. And because I'm closing this chapter, after today, you cease to exist for me. No more visits, no more letters, no contact. You're being erased from my life as thoroughly as you tried to erase me from yours. You can't just forget us, Marcus insisted. We're your family. We made you who you are. No, I said firmly. You made me who I was, a scared, exhausted girl trying to earn love that didn't exist. Thomas and Margaret helped me become who I am. Therapy helped me understand what you did. Grandma Rose's legacy gave me the tools to fight back, but I made myself who I am, someone who refuses to let your poison define my future. I gathered my documents, preparing to leave. Richard, you'll be dead within the year according to the prison doctors. The Torinos won't bother. Turns out you're not worth the effort. Janet, you'll serve your 15 years in minimum security teaching literacy to other inmates. Maybe you'll finally contribute something positive. Marcus, you'll spend the next 50+ years in a concrete box with nothing but your hatred for company. Wait, Janet called as I reached the door. Will you tell me when you get married, have children, just so I know the family line continues? I turned back one last time. The Brennan family line ends with Marcus in his cell. My children will be Hartwells or whatever name I choose when I marry. They'll know nothing of you except what's in the public record. A cautionary tale about how greed and hatred destroy everything they touch. Please, she begged, just a photo once a year, just to know. No. The word was final, absolute. You had 28 years to be my mother. You chose to be my would-be killer instead. You don't get to know my children. You don't get to see my happiness. You get to live with the knowledge that somewhere in the world I'm thriving despite your best efforts to destroy me. And that will have to be enough. I walked out to the sound of Marcus screaming threats, Janet sobbing, and Richard's labored breathing. The marshals would handle getting them back to their cells. Diana would process the paperwork for Marcus's transfer. The legal system would continue its grinding journey toward justice. But I was done. In the parking lot, Thomas and Margaret waited by the car. They'd wanted to come in, but I'd needed to do this alone. As I approached, they could see the weight lifting from my shoulders. How did it go? Margaret asked gently. It's finished, I said, surprising myself by smiling. They know they've lost everything. Marcus will never hurt anyone again, and I told them this was the last time they'd ever see or hear from me. Good, Thomas said firmly. They don't deserve any place in your life. As we drove away from the prison, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from that dinner where they'd tried to evict me to standing in a conference room watching their complete destruction. 2 years of revelations, trials, and rebuilding. But mostly, I thought about the future. Next week, I'd graduate with my nursing degree, finally able to afford the education they'd tried to deny me. Next month, the Rose Collins Foundation would open its doors, offering support to victims of family financial abuse. Next year, the Memorial Garden would bloom where their House of Lies once stood. I want to stop somewhere, I said suddenly. Thomas changed course without question, following my directions to a small cemetery on the outskirts of town. We walked together to a modest headstone, Rose Martha Brennan, beloved grandmother. I knelt and placed my hand on the sun-warmed stone. It's done, Grandma. Every last one of them. The evidence you gathered, the plans you made, the love you showed me, it all worked. They're finished and I'm free. The wind rustled through the trees, and for just a moment, I could swear I smelled her lavender perfume. I'm using the money to help others, I continued. The foundation, the scholarships, the victim support programs. Everything you protected is being used to break cycles of abuse. Your great-great-granddaughter will grow up safe and loved. The garden will help the community heal. Even the Torinos are going legitimate. You didn't just save me, Grandma. You saved so many people. Margaret placed a gentle hand on my shoulder as I stood. She would be so proud of you. I hope so, I said, touching the headstone one last time. I hope she knows that love won in the end. Despite everything they did, love won. As we walked back to the car, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete freedom. No more looking over my shoulder for Marcus. No more wondering when the other shoe would drop. No more family trying to destroy me. Just possibilities. Just future. Just the life Grandma Rose had spent 70 years ensuring I could have. The Brennan crime family was officially dead, but the Rose Collins legacy of love, justice, and protection that would bloom for generations. 2 years had passed since that final prison confrontation. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Rose Collins Foundation as I reviewed the day's schedule. We were hosting our monthly support group for family fraud survivors, and I wanted everything perfect. The caterers are here. Linda, my assistant, and herself, a survivor of family financial abuse, announced. And that documentary crew wants to interview you before the meeting starts. The documentary, Betrayal by Blood. The Brennan family crimes had won 3 Emmy Awards and sparked a national conversation about family fraud. I'd agreed to participate only because the producers promised to focus on the survivors and the resources available to help them. Shh, send them to the conference room, I said, straightening the photo of Grandma Rose that sat on my desk. I'll be there in 5 minutes. But first, I had a call to make. Thomas answered on the second ring, sounding breathless. Sorry, just got out of surgery. How's my favorite daughter? The adoption had been finalized 6 months ago. At 31, I'd legally become Thomas and Margaret Hartwell's daughter. Some people thought it was silly for an adult to be adopted, but for me, it was the final piece of building my chosen family. Nervous, I admitted. The support group has over 100 people registered today. That's our biggest yet. Because you're giving them hope, he said warmly, just like Rose gave you hope. The cycle continues, but in the best possible way. After we hung up, I walked to the conference room where the documentary crew waited. The interviewer, Patricia Chen, no relation to the corrupt psychiatrist, had become something of a friend during the filming process. Just a few follow-up questions, she promised as her crew set up. First, can you tell us about Richard's death? Richard had died 11 months after our final meeting, exactly as he'd predicted. The official cause was heart failure, though rumors persisted about prison justice. I'd felt nothing. No grief, no satisfaction, just a quiet recognition that one chapter had closed. He died alone, I said simply. Janet wasn't allowed to attend the funeral due to her sentence. Marcus was already in solitary. The state cremated him, and no one claimed the ashes. And Janet, still serving her sentence. I heard she's become the prison librarian and teaches reading to other inmates. Maybe she's finding some redemption. I don't know and don't particularly care. Mayor Marcus remains in ADX Florence. He's not eligible for any form of early release and has had his communication privileges permanently revoked after trying to hire another hitman through coded letters. He'll die there decades from now, having spent more years in solitary than he ever spent free. Patricia leaned forward. Do you ever regret cutting them off completely? No, I answered without hesitation. The best gift I ever gave myself was the freedom to stop caring about people who never cared about me. My energy goes to people who deserve it now. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering the foundation's work, the memorial garden that now bloomed where the house once stood, and the legislation I'd helped pass to make family financial fraud easier to prosecute. As the crew packed up, Linda knocked. Stephanie's here with Rose. My goddaughter burst into the office like a tiny hurricane, all curls and energy at 2.5 years old. Aunt Dusty, I drew you a picture. I scooped her up, admiring the colorful scribbles she presented proudly. Behind her, Stephanie smiled. She'd gone back to school, become a social worker, and now consulted for the foundation helping other women who'd been manipulated by partners. How's she doing? I asked as little Rose ran to play with the toys we kept in the corner. Better every day, Stephanie said. The therapist says she's showing no signs of trauma from the pregnancy stress. She's just happy. That's all we wanted. The support group meeting was powerful as always. 112 people gathered in our main hall sharing stories of betrayal and survival. An elderly man spoke about discovering his children had been stealing his retirement funds. A young woman described escaping a family that had forced her to take out loans in her name since she turned 18. A couple explained how they'd uncovered that their parents had stolen their children's college funds. The hardest part? One woman said, tears streaming, is that they were supposed to love me. How do you reconcile that the people who should protect you were the ones hurting you? I stood to address the room. You don't reconcile it. You accept that their version of love was toxic and learn to recognize real love when you find it. You build families of choice. You break cycles. You survive, and then you thrive, and then you help others do the same. After the meeting, I walked through the memorial garden. Miguel Reyes's daughters had designed something beautiful, winding paths between native plants benches where elderly neighbors gathered to chat, a playground where children's laughter erased the echoes of old crimes. At the center stood a fountain with a plaque in memory of all those who were lost and in honor of all those who survived. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Morrison. My kidney function remained stable at 80%. Thomas's gift continuing to save my life. Regular monitoring would continue forever, but I'd avoided dialysis and could live normally. Ms. Brennan, a young woman approached hesitantly. I mean, Ms. Hartwell. I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Either is fine, I assured her. How can I help you? Us. I think my brother is planning something similar to what your family did. I found forged documents with my signature. Secret loans. I don't know what to do. I guided her to a bench, pulling out my phone. First, you're safe here. Second, we have lawyers who can help immediately. Third, you're not alone. Let me introduce you to Linda. She coordinates our emergency interventions. As I connected her with resources, I thought about how many people we'd helped in 2 years. 347 active cases, millions in stolen assets recovered, dozens of criminals prosecuted. Grandma Rose's evidence had created a template for investigating family fraud that law enforcement agencies nationwide now used. The sun was setting by the time I returned home. Not the cramped apartment above the bakery or the fortress-like penthouse, but a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. Normal. Safe. Mine. Thomas and Margaret were there for our weekly dinner along with Patricia, the aunt Janet, had defrauded her children and several other relatives I'd discovered through the investigation. We'd built something beautiful from the ashes of the Brennan crimes. A real family based on choice and healing rather than blood and obligation. A toast. Thomas proposed raising his glass to 2 years of freedom. To Grandma Rose, I countered, who made it all possible. To the future, Margaret added, which looks brighter every day. We drank and conversation flowed around the table. Normal family talk. Patricia's daughter was graduating nursing school inspired by my story. Margaret had taken up painting. Thomas was backing legislation to protect elderly people from financial exploitation. Small victories, daily joys, the ordinary miracles of lives lived without fear. Later, as I cleaned up, I found myself at the window overlooking the backyard. Sometimes, in quiet moments like this, the ghosts whispered, not Richard or Janet or Marcus. They were locked away in their consequences, but the ghost of who I might have been if they'd succeeded. A statistic. a cautionary tale, another victim who didn't survive their family. Instead, I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by chosen families' laughter, godchildren's artwork on my refrigerator, and certificates on the wall honoring the foundation's work. I wore Grandma Rose's wedding ring on my right hand and an engagement ring on my left. David was a fellow nurse who understood survival and didn't mind the security measures that would always be part of my life. My phone chimed with an encrypted message from Daniel Torino. Stephanie's parents have been fully vetted. No connections to any criminal enterprises. The child remains safe. As promised, this is the final report. Our business is concluded with gratitude. Even the mob kept their word better than my birth family ever had. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More survivors seeking help. The ongoing civil suits against Marcus's hidden assets. Wedding planning that included background checks on all vendors, the permanent vigilance that was the price of my freedom. But tonight I was just Dusty Hartwell survivor and thriver surrounded by love that was real because it was chosen. As I turned out the lights and headed to bed, I paused at the photo wall in the hallway. Grandma Rose smiled from a dozen frames. Young with her first family, older with the mask she wore to survive, elderly with the knowing look of someone playing the longest game. "We did it," I whispered to her image. "We actually did it." Somewhere in a federal prison, Janet was teaching someone to read. Somewhere in a concrete box, Marcus was learning that hatred was poor company for life. Somewhere in unmarked ashes, Richard had found the only peace he'd ever know. And here in this normal house, with its abnormal security system, in this chosen family, with its extraordinary origin in this life, built on the ruins of attempted murder, I was finally fully, completely free. The Brennan legacy of crime had ended. The Rose Collins legacy of love would last forever. And me, I was just getting started. Thank you for joining me on this journey from betrayal to triumph. If you or someone you know has experienced family financial fraud or abuse, please know that you're not alone. Resources are available, that survival is possible, and thriving is achievable. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to take advantage of you? How did you find the strength to fight back? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider sharing it with others who might need to hear that survival is possible. Like this video if it touched your heart, and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and redemption. Remember, sometimes the family that tries to destroy you inadvertently gives you the strength to save not just yourself, but others too. Your story matters. Your survival matters. And your future is worth fighting for. Until next time, stay strong and keep rising.